My name is Kevin Teman, and I'm the creator of Artificially Intelligent Matchmaker, which is a talking dating app that gets to know you over a week and introduces you to people automatically. And the reason I created AIMM is because I use dating apps my whole life, and they're horrible. And I used a human matchmaking service where humans actually guide you through the process and hold your hand and coach you and introduce you to people and share feedback. That was a wonderful experience for me. So I recreated the human matchmaking experience in a talking app. And it's called AIMM, AIMM, Artificially Intelligent Matchmaker. And my interest in NDE started about a year and 3 months ago, when my ex-personal assistant told me about her near-death experience when she was 18 years old, and from bacterial meningitis. And it was such a profound experience for her, and she conveyed it to me with such a rawness. She gave the whole thing to me, and it started me on my journey of researching NDEs in combination with some partial near-death experiences I've had in the past. And so I believe that NDEs are the key to unlocking the next era of society, or this era that we're currently entering right now, where late-stage capitalism and some of the greed and evil that resides in that will fade away, as we all understand that the real model is connectedness. The real model that awaits us in the NDE world, as thousands of people have been reporting, probably millions, but thousands that are documented, have been reporting for a long, long time, that connectedness is how everything works, and that you will actually see that when you get up there. So I just want everybody to start looking for themselves and realizing that that's the real model, and stop believing the things that we were taught in school of materialism only, that the brain creates consciousness and that it's all black after death. That stuff is not real. That's not correct. And so NDEs will take you to the real reality, and it'll also help everybody enter this new era that I think we're all entering.
And my name is Christian Ramirez. I work in IT support, but when I'm not doing my day job, I am a researcher, and I research into near-death experiences. It all started for me when I was younger. I've had a lot of spiritual experiences, seeing spirits, mediumship experiences, a lot of esoteric and psychic phenomena that happened to me, and I wanted to start looking for answers. So I started delving into this research, and it is my hope that I can spread this awareness, this knowledge about these topics to help facilitate healing in people, for people who are scared of death. Maybe they're told they're going to die by their doctors. Maybe they lost a loved one. I really want to promote that, spread that kind of healing, and bring awareness to people, so that way they can see the more interconnected oneness with each other, so we can build a much more loving society. I also created my own YouTube channel called Transcendence to help spread that awareness, and Instagram account as well that taps into these types of topics, from metaphysics to near-death experiences and all of that in between.
Okay, you were mentioning, we were talking about in that discussion, we were the only ones that actually had looked into it, and you were taking that somewhere else.
Yeah, I just wanted to get into, just for people like who are wondering, like, how did you come across this information? How did this all happen for you?
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. I was going to ask you the same thing. So when did I start being interested in near-death experiences? I got to say, my whole life I've heard about them, and my parents have told me about them, and my dad told me about it in kind of a funny way, like, oh, that movie Flatliners, and oh, there's some real things that are going on there.
Yeah.
But everybody kind of laughed at it. Nobody actually looked into it, and I watched the movie Flatliners, and back then I just didn't care. I didn't look into it at all.
Makes sense.
What people's real stories were. Yeah. And so my whole life growing up, I'm 39 now, and it wasn't until last year that I finally figured this stuff out, that this is really happening. Near-death experiences are real and are so compelling. They have so much information.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Yeah. So when I first got into it was actually what the trigger for me was when I had a personal assistant that told me her story about when she died when she was 18 years old, and she had bacterial meningitis, and she suffered from grand mal seizures. And I know bacterial meningitis is one of the pathways where people have experienced NDEs in the past.
Evan Alexander.
So yeah, Evan Alexander is a good case. So it was coincidental that, or seemingly coincidental that she had the same condition and setup, but she went into a coma for 2 weeks. And when she told me her story, it was very raw. It was like she gave it to me directly, like everything, all of her real feelings about it, and everything. She was very open about it. But and she's been scared about it ever since it happened, and she's still confused to this day about which reality is the real reality.
Mm-hmm.
She thinks that where she went in her NDE is the real reality, and that this reality we all live in is not real. This is the sub-reality.
Right.
She believes that for the last 7 years. She's 25 now. But when she told me her story, I knew it was true by the way she was telling me, and I hadn't looked into NDEs at that point. But I remembered when I had a near-death experience, but it was a mini version compared to most people's.
Right.
I just went to a black place for a while, and it
People
decided to keep living.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, I'll tell the story real quick.
Sure.
I train in karate, and I've trained in karate for the last 14 years, and I was a national competitor and highly competitive. And I worked on making myself as skillful and as physical as possible. It was an obsession for me. But I got a lot of spiritual revelations through practicing karate. But one night I was practicing, and I was in the locker room, and I was just doing some stretches, and I was doing stretches down near the ground, and then I got up, and I was alone. I got up, and all the blood rushed out of my head, and I suddenly felt like I was getting woozy. And then the next thing I remember is I woke up on the ground, and I remember the sound of my head hitting the concrete floor, and a cracking sound.
Oh man.
Yeah. And it echoed through the locker room. I could hear the crack of my skull echo through the locker room.
That would haunt me.
I remembered. Oh, it was horrible. I remembered it. And I remembered the sound, but I woke up. I didn't know where I was. And I got up, and I didn't know where I was or what was happening. And I started walking to the mirror to check myself. I felt blood. There's blood coming out of the back of my head.
Yeah.
And I walked over to the mirror, and I looked, and I was bleeding. And I started remembering where I was as I was looking in the mirror. But as I was remembering where I was, the very next thing I remembered so well was that place that I just was at. It was like blackness, but not scary, like really dark. It wasn't scary like it was dark, and it didn't feel like I was in a black necessarily. It was just kind of a space that felt black.
Yeah.
But it was a place that was separate, and that I made a decision from that place to keep living.
Right.
And I remember looking in the mirror and remembering everything that happened, and then remembering that I for sure decided that I needed to keep living wherever that place was. And that's why I was back. And I knew in that moment that you live, you choose whether you live or die.
Yes.
At what point you live or die. And I had that theory actually developing my whole life, because I've had a lot of other events where I've woken up while I was driving on the highway, going straight into a median. I fell asleep because I was tired, and the median was coming straight towards me, and I woke up at the last second and steered away from the steel median that would have for sure been my death. And just it was all at the right moment and everything.
Right.
And I had this theory growing, and every time I lose the blood out of my head when I stand up too quickly, I always think, can I control that? And my answer is usually, yeah, I can control that. I can either give into it and let it go and go into that place, or I can fight it and come back and stay in this world and keep the blood going, and
right.
and I always knew that. But when I hit my head and got up, that's when I was 100% sure that you decide when you live or die.
Yes.
And that was just the seed that planted in my head. And then it was 10 years or more later, at 38 years old, that I met my personal assistant. She told me her whole story. And when she died at 18, she went into a coma for 2 weeks, was at the hospital in a coma for 2 weeks. Her family was there, highly worried. And when she woke up, everybody looked at her and was like, "Where have you been?" And she said, I was visiting grandma.
Mm-hmm.
And she described that she went into an airport and she traveled.
Yeah.
And she visited her grandma. And her grandma and her had this like elaborate conversation that was very meaningful. A lot of things they wanted to say, and they said them. But when she woke up, the family said, "That's impossible. Your grandma is dead. Your grandma's been dead for, I think it was 2 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Your grandma's been dead." And but she was visiting her, she was talking with her grandma vividly. And so when they said grandma's dead, her reaction was just confusion. She just didn't understand. That is when her confusion began about which reality was real. And so she thought, she was really scared. She was worried that she's now stuck in this place where and she's 18 years old.
Right.
And I've since read about near-death experiencers having the same kind of things, but she was confused. I think because of her age, and so her parents were telling her that that's all, that's impossible, blah blah blah. But she remained confused, and for the next 7 years, from 18 to 25, she has always been confused and always believed that other world is the real world and this world is a fake world. And her parents are trying to send her to therapy and convince her that it's not the case, and they're so worried about her. And the other thing that happened to her is she's not afraid to die at all.
Yep.
She welcomes death.
Yeah.
And she's told me this so many times in confidence. She's
very typical of near-death experiencers, coming back, losing the fear of death.
Yeah.
Even
exactly.
This is not always the case, but most people who go through such an experience end up dropping their religion and becoming more spiritual. And some who are even atheists, have those types of beliefs, end up becoming more spiritual, more open, because it's undeniable at that point after going through that experience.
Yeah, exactly right. And at this point, I didn't know any of that. I had never looked into NDEs. Mm-hmm. I was just hearing her raw story, and she didn't know about NDEs either. And so that's how this story was so pure for me.
Right.
Is that she's 25 years old. She's telling me about a story when she was 18. She's never looked into NDEs. Mm-hmm. I told her that this sounds similar to what other people have gone through with the tunnel of light and stuff like that.
Right.
And she wasn't aware of it. So she's never gone and started studying NDEs. She's actually just been scared and sort of confused for the last 7 years since it happened. And so she welcomes death, and she tells her parents, she's like, "Mom, I just want you to know, if I die, I will be happy. I'm looking forward to it." And Mom gets highly concerned. Don't. That sounds suicidal. Yeah. And they try to tell her, "Don't be suicidal." And she tries to explain, it's not suicide. It's just I welcome it, but it's very concerning for people. And that is one part of the reason that I really want to talk today and get everybody to understand what actually happens. So right. Number one, they're not so confused.
Yeah, people fear what they don't understand. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's to answer the question in full circle, that's what first got me into it. And then after I learned about my assistant's near-death experience, I then started looking into it. It coincided with what I remember about deciding I needed to live. But she made a decision too to come back. And it was in talking with her grandma, and I don't know more details about her decision there, but most of it was around her grandma and in the airport. Right. And so I remember having decided, so I started looking into NDEs, and then I found quickly that just watching them on YouTube,
Yeah.
you can find them really easily just by searching NDE.
There are
So
millions of stories out there, and it's crazy. It's only increasing now because society's facilitating the space for people to talk about this. Because if we go back in time, you were threatened to go into the loony bin trying to talk about this, so people kept it to themselves. So, and there's even records of near-death experiences going back far into history.
Yeah, absolutely. But even today, people are still going into the loony bin because this is my personal assistant. She's 25 now. Her parents still think she's crazy.
Yeah,
which is a terrible conclusion to have for what such a significant and meaningful thing that happened. That we would like to outline, basically how it happens and how it happens for everybody. But so I started studying all of them, and I found quickly that the themes matched what my assistant went through.
Mm-hmm.
And they also matched with my experience of when I decided to live.
Right.
And I realized that's a distinct element of near-death experiences where they make an informed decision, like in a clear place, of like, should I go back, or should I not live? They're thinking about it. They're deciding. And this is obvious, by the way, in movies. I use the example of like the guy that's dying. He's like, tell my wife I love her. And he's dead.
Yeah.
There's an implied level of control when you die, but it's even more than that. There's such a connection to the spiritual world that you can decide. The spirit can make a decision in a place that doesn't have time involved, in an infinite time place, which we'll be touching on that. But that's the answer to your question. That's how I got into it. And then ever since then, I've been studying them constantly. And that was about a year and 2 months ago. So for a year and 2 months, I've been watching NDEs daily. And I've watched over hundreds of NDEs on YouTube. And I watch their direct recounts. I watch the people talking.
Right.
And I always go for the ones where they have video so I can see what they're feeling and everything.
Yeah.
And I've noticed a few things. I noticed they're very genuine. I noticed they're more genuine than other people I've talked to about other subjects. When you look at people that are talking about their NDEs, especially through video, they're some of the most genuine and balanced and centered people that you can hear from.
Yeah.
And this is one sign.
Yeah. You can really see them like reflecting on what had happened. And they also did a study that near-death experience memories are different than normal memories, the way they're able to recall those memories exactly as it was. And even you'll hear often some near-death experiencers say, I could just go right there just talking about it, and then they tear up, they get emotional because it's like they're reliving the experience by just thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And lots more things, like they remember it perfectly for so long, for the rest of their lives. Most of them I've seen.
Yes.
They can recount everything decades later, unlike dreams that fade.
Dreams
near-death experiences,
or even normal memories and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. So I've watched hundreds of recounts directly, and I've also watched discussions from physicians talking about it, roundtable discussions, everything that's available, in video, and I've read certainly a lot too. I research on Google and I find all the studies. I've read some of those raw studies that are like white papers that are all statistics and everything too.
Right.
And yeah, I definitely delved into the non-good NDEs, the bad NDEs, where they go to like hellish.
Oh yeah,
hellish realms.
NDEs. Yeah.
Because who couldn't be interested in that? That's we all have the question: are we going to hell or heaven? And is that place real? And we can both talk a lot about that, and we'll tell you exactly what that's all about. But of course, I was interested in the hellish NDEs, and I studied that to the furthest extent that I could, and I found recounts of all the hellish ones. I read all their word by word recounts, and but my research has been 90% first person, their actual stories of themselves going through it. And I'm not believing scientists when they say that this or that is leading to this and that's leading to this. I'm not talking about the explanations for why it happens. I'm talking about the real things that they went through, and so that's what I know. Yeah,
And
I think your experience is similar, but
yeah,
I'd like to ask you the same question, Christian. Is when I know you had a lot of experiences where you had a lot of spiritual experiences, and I have too that I haven't mentioned. But when did you first learn about NDEs, and how did you get into it?
oh man, this is definitely different, a bit weird for me. I've had a lot of supernatural experiences that happened to me when I was very young. Apparently, when I was younger, my mom said I was talking to my grandmother who passed away, and things like that. And then one day in middle school, I woke up very early in the morning, and it was like right at dawn. So the sky was still super blue. The sun hasn't fully come out yet. And I'm laying in my bed, and I see I have a few more minutes before I have like another hour or so before I had to get up. So I was excited, but I couldn't get back to sleep. And then I noticed when I opened my eyes again, I couldn't see my window. And I'm like, that's weird. Where did my window go? And then I started looking up, and I see the silhouette of a being standing in my room. Super tall, 7-8 feet tall, standing in my room, just black. I couldn't see through it. And it scared me, and I couldn't move. I couldn't scream no matter how much I tried. I could only kind of move my eyes a little bit. And after having that experience, I was terrified. My mom walked in the room and it disappeared. So this wasn't a dream. I was fully awake. I just couldn't do anything. But as soon as she walked into the room, the entity or whatever it was just disappeared. And at that moment, it was just like a big wake up call for what is real? What was that? And I had trouble sleeping, and I've had many different experiences with sleep paralysis after that. I had to look into it. At the time when I was younger, I didn't look into it because I didn't have my own computer. I was still in middle school. But years later, after having more and more sleep paralysis experiences, I wanted to understand it because it was freaking me out. Nobody seemed to have an understanding that seemed to make sense to me. Like doctors and scientists will say, well, your body's still asleep and it's preventing you from acting out your dreams. Technically you're hallucinating, you're like half dreaming, and that's not what it felt like at all. So I started to delve into research, and then it would drop off. I would go back to my normal everyday life, and then one day I had a dream where I met my grandmother who passed away, and I was just given the understanding, I don't know how else to explain it, that I had to look up near-death experiences. So as soon as I woke up, I started looking them up. It was just super strange. As soon as I woke up, I was like this urge, like I couldn't stop. Like I had to keep it, like every day was just looking up more and more experiences. And
different from my experience.
Yeah.
We both came into it from different angles.
Yeah. And I've also had experiences where I would communicate with people who had crossed over. And at first, you struggle with this. Am I just imagining this? Because, there's no, it was my understanding, there's no school for this. You also have to talk to certain people who are more open to even discuss these types of things. So who do you really talk to? Who do you talk to? And so I kept most of that to myself. But for the people that were open, I would share this with, and I would actually get validation. So they're like, "Oh my God, how did you know that?" Like, "Oh my God, like that's accurate. Like, how did you know?" And I was like, "I don't know. This is just what was shown to me, and I'm sharing it with you." And so I started doing more research, and my research stems from all of the books that I've read. So I've read many different books on the topic. Also, a big advocate for watching those videos. There's thousands of those videos out there on YouTube, free to watch. I've listened to those. I've also listened to audios, podcasts, even listened to some researchers who are more open to this topic, and they're actually investigating it and taking it more seriously. I follow IANS, the Institute and Association for Near-Death Studies, and DOPS, Division of Perceptual Studies, the people who work there. So I follow their work as well.
I keep wanting to remind everybody, so I'll keep doing this. All you have to do is search NDE on YouTube, and you get
NDE.
lots of just, and it's pleasurable to watch it.
Yeah, NDE experience, near-death experience, and you'll see thousands of videos pop up. There's many different kinds.
So you had an urge from this dream that you had to look into near-death experiences.
Yeah,
and then after you looked into them, what did you find?
I was just like, I know I've seen them before, but I was kind of.
Oh, by the way, sorry, Christian, to interrupt you, but
sure.
how long ago was that? When you had that dream and
that
decided
was like almost 6 years ago, and I already did my own research before that, but it was just it wasn't dedicated research. It was more like, oh, let me look this up really quick, and then I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and then I would leave it alone. It was more like, this is what you have to do. You have to do this. And it was just this knowing. I don't know how else to explain it other than that I had to do this. So I started, and as I started looking into it more and more, the implications were profound because they seemed to point in a direction that here is the answer. This is what happens. And it's just out there, but most people are unaware of it. And it just blew my mind. I'm like, how is this not like a mainstream thing? How do people not know about this? And it's starting to become that now as more people become more aware of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. How did you? What are your main methods of? Do you usually look on YouTube? Do you research on Google through those organizations you mentioned?
Everything. So I utilize everything. I even read some books. I started getting some books to get more answers, and just to show you a couple, this is one of the books that I've read, Evidence of the Afterlife, The Science of Near-Death Experiences by Dr. Jeffrey Long. And I actually have bookmarked here something I was going to pull up for near-death experiences so we can go over this with people to actually discuss he puts in about 12 or 13 actual, I guess you would call them things that are typical of near-death experiences, like being out of the body, heightened senses, experiencing a more real than real reality. That's the way people tend to describe it. And we can actually like go through the commonalities. Just to show another book is The New Science of Consciousness Survival and the Meta Paradigm Shift to a Conscious Universe by Dr. Alan Ross Huguenot, who is an engineer, scientist, worked for the Navy, and he had his own near-death experience and talked about the journey. And he breaks down in his book pretty much the difference between real science and pseudoscience, because we seem to be having this issue where we have these scientists studying the phenomenon because it's real, having all these types of tests, like at the Division of Perceptual Studies, where they test psychics and mediums, things like that, and they can repeat the results. But then you have these materialistic scientists who won't even look at the data. They're like, I'm not even going to look because I know it's wrong kind of mentality. So he breaks down in the book what real science is, because real science is you have to take in all the evidence, even if it disproves your pet theory, and to come to a conclusion. But if you don't have that data and you just stick with something or what you know, that's a belief system. Now you choose to not look outside of your belief system to
said the word pet theory before. Is pet theory, what does that mean? Just a theory that's like your pet that you love?
No, it's just used to describe pretty much like if a scientist says like, oh, I discovered that this is what gravity is. This is my theory on gravity. But let's say there's data coming in to disprove that and that something else is going on, then you have to take that in, even if it's disproving what you came to understand through your studies, your research. If something else is coming in, you have to look at both objectively, and you have to use that data because that's the truth. If you want the truth, you have to look at it. Yeah,
I feel like when I was researching near-death experiences, I was going between two conclusions of why this was all covered up. Or why it seemed like a cover-up. Yeah. It's a natural conclusion to jump to. Like,
I think there is actually a reason to that too. Has been, I believe, a cover up to this information.
yeah, I'm sure there is some cover up going on, but I've also kind of arrived that it's not an intentional cover up. I understand the confusion of why we attach to materialism first, and I want to explain for people watching step by step. I'll try to break it down. That materialism is the scientific view we were all taught in school that is actually wrong. I mean, it's no other way to say it. I mean, a lot of people like to politely walk around the subject and say, well, we think it's probably wrong, but it seems like clearly wrong if you look into it.
Right.
And that's the materialist viewpoint of that matter is here, atoms and things that make up substances like tables and desks, but also that make up our brain and everything. And our brain gives, and the theory is brain gives rise to consciousness. The interaction between all those neurons and stuff create consciousness out of material stuff somehow.
Yeah.
But that's a big jump. Number one, they're saying that non-physical stuff, which is consciousness, it's not physical. The way you feel that you are, I am something. This is not related to physical. This is a mental world we live in. Our subjective world that we live in is not physical. Right. We're subjectively looking out into what we think is the physical world,
right.
And we can touch objects. But scientists are saying that the mental world comes out of the physical world, but they don't have any theories on how it would happen.
Yeah, there's no.
So that's a jump.
Yeah, there's no scientist today that could tell you how the brain gives rise to consciousness. They don't know. They don't even know how anesthesia abates consciousness. They have no idea. Yet.
Exactly. And I'm an AI person, and even in AI and computers, people are not able to figure out how the brain produces consciousness in order to emulate that in AI. So all the AI development that's going on now is just basically ignoring consciousness and hoping that it will somehow enter the scene later.
Yeah.
And so that's really what's happening. And but just to finish my explanation on materialist is that, the material stuff creates consciousness, and that's been the theory. But the other major part of that theory is that the brain creates our consciousness. Therefore, everything we feel and the way you feel like you are something is they sometimes call it an illusion.
Right.
That the brain makes you think you are something, but really it's just all physical stuff. And then when you die, it's all black. It's nothingness. You're just gone. There's nothing there. That part is wrong. Right. That part's wrong because near-death experiences clearly show us it's wrong. Right. And so these materialist only scientists need to look at near-death experiences and stop propagating the idea that there's nothing at death, that it all goes black. Stop propagating the idea that the brain creates the experience of all this.
Yeah.
However, it's very confusing because there are studies where you can go in and poke the brain and change the behavior of somebody. And this is the strongest point materialists have, and they're hanging on to it.
Yeah.
But it's easy to explain from the other viewpoint. Like first of all, NDEs are happening, and NDEs show you that there's another viewpoint that's very strong. And the second thing is it can easily account for that poking the brain thing.
Right.
And so one model I like to use, and I'll let you talk on this. I just wanted to get this part out. The model I like to use is like cell phones and the internet. Mm-hmm. That the way we have set up cell phones and the internet, a phone is a conduit for the internet. The internet flows into the phone, but you can actually poke the internals of the phone and change its behavior,
right? Because
it has circuits inside, but it doesn't mean you're changing the internet, and the internet is consciousness,
right?
And that is how we operate, and that is very clear from watching NDEs, which you guys will all watch after you're done with this video, because that's where you can find out the real answers to this stuff. And when you watch NDEs, you see that consciousness comes it either flows into the brain, or the brain is just a symbol of somehow of consciousness. And but either way, consciousness is not produced from the brain.
Right.
That's the thing that people have gotten wrong.
And to support what you're talking about here, what you're describing is actually called filter theory. And that's what quantum scientists and are in a rush. They're in a headlong rush to like be the first one to prove this. And it's that consciousness, again, like you were saying, is outside and being filtered through like a valve into the physical body. And to help support that evidence, we have very strong cases which the skeptics never, ever talk about. They'll never bring these up. We have 2 strong cases, or actually 3 that we can technically talk about. You've already talked about one with your friend with cerebral meningitis. Dr. Eben Alexander was a neurosurgeon and an atheist who also had bacterial cerebral meningitis, affecting all 8 lobes of his brain. And Pam Reynolds, she's one of my favorite near-death experience cases. She's not the only one, but she actually went through a procedure called hypothermic circulatory arrest procedure, or standstill operation procedure. This was, I believe, in the 80s and the 90s. When the procedure was first being developed, she had a massive brain aneurysm that was near the base stem of her brain. So it was very hard to get to, and she was turned down left and right from different doctors on doing an operation because they weren't aware of the procedure until a doctor had reached out to her in Arizona. His name is actually, I will put his name up on the screen or something here for you guys to watch so you can see who I'm talking about. But he came up, he was talking about the procedure he practiced and offered it to her, and she had this choice of die in a few months, however long you have to live, or try this procedure. So she decided to do this, where they put her to sleep. They chilled her body down. They cut into her femoral artery to drain her body of blood so that there was no blood near her brain. They then taped her eyes shut. They put clickers into her ear so that they could measure brain activity. So I guess like if the clickers will make decibel sounds, like sounds clicking, and they have machines that monitor everything. So she's being monitored very closely here. Eyes closed, tape shut, and then they cover over her face, and then they only expose the area of the brain where they're working. And yet she recounts this full-blown out-of-body near-death experience, starting off in the out-of-body experience where she's describing what the doctors were using, the tools that they were using. She described the music that they were playing, and she said it was kind of insensitive, the music that they were playing.
So her brain had no blood flow, is that right?
Yeah, brain had no blood flow. They gave, the doctor himself says, and you can see this on YouTube, they gave her a metabolic drug to stop all brain activity. And no blood flow in the brain. She's completely flatlined during this procedure. That's why it's called standstill operation, hypothermic circulatory arrest. Her heart is not beating, her brain, for over an hour. Yet she was able to recount the entire operation procedure, including what they were saying to each other. But they weren't aware of her. And she even ended up feeling a sense of pulling towards this tunnel. She met a deceased family member, her uncle, and I believe her grandmother. And her uncle, in this experience, her uncle told her that she had to go back, and she didn't want to because she started to enjoy the pleasurable sensations in that reality, and she didn't want to go back. Yeah, and
yeah.
But
I have one question about that. I think
Sure.
the audience would also want to hear is when she was recounting the operation, could she also recount parts that were in the middle of the operation and
Yes.
towards the end and towards the beginning as well?
As far as I understand it, it seems like it was in the middle or to the beginning. She doesn't know when it started. Her experience for her started, I guess, we can assume when they started the drilling. They have to use this drill tool to get into, to cut her open. And she started hearing this like very shrieking uncomfortable sound, and that's when it started for her. It started with sound. She heard like that drill sound, and then that's when she started to have more awareness, and she started to view the doctors. She was like shoulder level of the doctors, seeing what they were doing. She could hear them even say, because there was actually a complication where they cut into the wrong place, or the wrong artery, or they couldn't get it right, so they had to cut into her other leg. So she recounts that conversation between the doctors and the nurses.
Yeah, which, but for everybody watching, that's pretty common. People are observing the environment where their body is, and also Eben Alexander had the same experience, as you would know. Kristen, you've looked into Eben probably even
Yes.
more extensively than I have, but I love watching Eben Alexander talk about it. He's
I've watched a lot
but
of his discussions, and I'm on his third book now. I already finished his first two.
Oh, cool. I haven't read his books yet. I like to watch him talk.
Yeah, he's awesome.
But
Great speaker.
he had the same thing. He could describe things, and so what was I going to say about the relationship between her? Yeah, most people can see their environment for a while, and oh yeah, he was completely flatlined as well. He just had no brain activity and no blood flow.
Yeah.
And most of the near-death experiences that happen when there's no brain activity and no blood flow. And I think most of them happen when the person's dead, declared dead, after they're declared dead. But they're getting more and more confused as about when they can declare people dead.
Yeah.
And so, like Sam, what's that physician's name? Sam Neill or Sam? I don't know if you watched him. He's a physician on the front lines working on people that go through this.
For heart attacks, he studies heart attack. I think he's.
I don't know if it's heart attacks. We'll get his name and we'll put it on the screen. But Sam, that doctor, he's very good at describing everything that he's seen, and he describes that it's mostly when people don't have any brain activity anymore, and they seem like they're dead and they're gone. That's the time when they're describing things that are happening around them in the environment. So the physicians that work on the front line are always convinced that materialist science and our viewpoint now can't explain what's occurring. So the physicians always end up convinced. And I've watched dozens of physicians talk about observing the out-of-body experiences and then talking to them afterwards. The physicians are convinced. The people that are not convinced are scientists that are sitting behind the scenes not looking at these things. And so I wanted to make that point.
And to add another note too, is just that it's very important to go over how physicians are taught, because a normal doctor, who's doing surgery and helping people to that capacity, is not a quantum physicist who's looking at the state of the universe and existence. And quantum physicists and scientists have started to understand this now. Max Planck is one of them, and they're having that understanding that the universe is conscious, and they know that that's the stuff they're looking into. A normal doctor isn't looking into that. He's not being taught in school the difference between energy, vibration. He's they're being taught how to work on someone medically, how to use a scalpel, those types of things. It's a different world. It's a different world. So they're going with what they understand.
Yeah, exactly. But physicians have a better grounds to objectively make the statements of what they're seeing and what might be happening, because they're not theorizing. Like Kristen's saying, they're not theorizing behind the scenes. They're baffled. The ones that I have watched, they're trying to speak out about it. It's this weird like two-front thing going on where physicians are trying to get the word out, now they are. They're not afraid anymore. They're talking about it. I suspect they were probably afraid to lose their jobs or be viewed as too
that's another thing
out there wild. unstable or something,
And
which is why most people are put down when they talk about what happens after death.
that's a good indicator to show where we're at too, that people are, they want to talk about it, but they don't want to lose their job. And honestly, it's my favorite I love near-death experiences generally, but my favorite are when they happen to scientists and doctors themselves, because they can also articulate their experiences a lot better. Like Dr. Eben Alexander, his explanation on the near-death experience is a lot different than someone who isn't a doctor or a scientist in explanation. So
I've watched Eben Alexander a few times. That this is probably one of the best people I've ever seen speak.
Yeah,
much less, on the great topic of answering so many questions of what happens.
yeah, he's
able to, he's able to articulate well, and he's he's objective about it, and so the evidence is convincing. Where can we go first, Kristen? I want to get everybody to at least get to the trailhead, looking into NDEs themselves. And I always say, and you've said before, don't take our word for it. Go look them up. Listen to what we're saying, because we'll tell you the conclusions.
right.
We can tell you what we've found with all that, but still, don't believe us. Discover it for yourself.
Yeah.
Discovering for yourself is so powerful, and it's so easy. You just look up NDE on YouTube, and look at it, watch all the stories, and think about what it means. Like, first of all, even if it's not a shared place, even if you come to the conclusion that it's a made-up hallucination, which I don't believe at all, even if it's a hallucination, it's still incredibly significant.
Right.
The themes, there's like 12 or something themes. Maybe you can correct me on how many there are. That they travel through the tunnel. They meet deceased relatives, only deceased. Never alive, or very, very rarely alive. It's like 90% deceased.
I actually have something to add on that whenever you're finished.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So they always see a deceased relative. They travel through the tunnel. They always review their life. They always live the experience of everybody they interacted with, and there was some emotion with. They relive it through the other person's feelings, and they relive it through the other person. Right. And they're able to do it through every person they've ever interacted with, everybody that they made feel bad, and everybody that they made feel good. They see the effects, and they feel the effects opposite.
Right, the life review.
The life review, and it's described sort of like a 360 panorama of feeling everybody's emotions at the same time, of everything that you've done.
Yeah.
And this is universal across all NDE, almost all NDEs, most of them, vast majority, that they relive their whole lives. Then they make a decision of whether to die, continue on, or go back to their human body life. And there's more things. They have spiritual guides. They have discussions, and there's more themes too. That these themes are consistent across all thousands of ones that have been researched, but it's more likely millions, of people that have gone through this.
And it doesn't matter your culture, your religious beliefs, what country you come from. It doesn't really seem to matter. And again, I like to reiterate, not everyone lets go of their religious belief after having such an experience, but many do. They end up becoming more spiritual. And just to touch on that very briefly, people who have a near-death experience will first try to, tell, the doctors and nurses around them, the people around them, what they experience. And a lot of times they get rejected, or, you were on drugs, it was just in your head, or, oh, you imagined it. Then they tell family members. And if the family members aren't open, the one place they turn to, you would think, would be like church or whatever, church is the one that I hear come up a lot, where they'll try to go tell a priest or talk to someone like that. And that's not even the best place, because there are some people who have had near-death experience. They tell a priest and they're like, oh, that wasn't real. It was of the devil because Jesus wasn't there. And then they're like, well, who do I go to talk about this experience? So it becomes this, it gets very hard for some people to talk about. And some people take many, many years to disclose that information.
Exactly. Yeah. And I wouldn't go to a church because I've never been religious growing up, and I was never spiritual growing up. And my family believed that spirituality and religion is for stupid people.
Yeah.
Basically, if you don't have enough,
Yeah.
if you
I
can't think through
understand.
things enough,
Yeah.
which I don't agree with now. I think spirituality is ingrained in everything. It's obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a consciousness.
Yeah.
We feel spiritual.
I honestly believe we're getting to the stage, humanity is getting to the stage where they're going to mix science with spirituality, that understanding. Because there's, sorry?
Could you repeat that? It broke up.
Oh, sorry. No, I said I believe that humanity is getting to the stage where we're going to come to this understanding, especially with the understanding of near-death experiences, that science is going to meet with spirituality. And they're going to start having that understanding where you start talking about, quantum physics, string theory, alternate realities, things like that. But near-death experiences tie a lot of that together, and scientists are starting to study it now, which is awesome. We're starting to see series. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. I would actually add to that you're saying like they're going to be melded together. Yes, I agree. But I think they're already perfectly set up to make a new converging science that has all of them.
Yes.
Mentalism and physicalism of traditional science, that the only thing is real is material stuff, is easy to just put an adapter on that and meld it into the other science that also includes near-death experiences.
Yes.
And so physicalism can still be here. All the science that we have of how gravity works and
I completely agree. Yeah.
All valid. All you have to do is change the very end that says, well, it's not physical stuff. It may not be physical stuff. We don't know that yet. But the very end saying that spirituality is another world that can blend into it, and the two worlds are connected.
Right.
That's an easy adaptation to put on it. But all the science remains intact.
Yeah.
All the disciplines remain intact. They just need to be converged together.
And we can talk about facts for a moment. We already know scientifically through the law of conservation that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So if we're made up of energy and we die, where does that energy go? What happens to that energy if it can't be created or destroyed? Now, we also know that our awareness as people is expanding, especially scientifically. Before, science likes to do this thing, and people have this mindset or this awareness where back then flying through the air was impossible. It was considered illusionary. There's no way we could fly. And now we have airplanes. And space travel. Oh, that's crazy talk. Never. Now we're on the moon. We're expanding our knowledge. So to presume to say that we understand everything as it is and there's no such thing as consciousness we don't have that full understanding yet as a people, but we're coming into that awareness. So it's better to just be open because we're getting new and new evidence every day, and we're able to do crazy things. Like we have, we can talk to our phones now. That's amazing.
That's just a magic trick.
Yeah.
I'm a programmer, so I'm on the other end of that, making those things happen. And I always say I'm a magician because that's really what I am on essence, because you're not really talking to your phone. You kind of are, but there's so many pieces in the background. Whenever you have a visual interface or something, it's all illusions and tricks to make it feel like something you're familiar with. Right. Which is very, very similar to a lot of people's theories on the physical world as well, that it could be just symbols and illusions. There's a theory that the brain is a symbol of what's happening in a mental world.
Right.
And that's not far out to grasp, especially once you look into NDEs and see what's happening after death. The symbol concept is very real, and we do that with our video games and movies. There's the screen is there, and the screen has symbols on it, but the screen itself is just a it's an illusion. It's just some pixels on the back of a thing.
Yeah.
And it's easy for this world that we live in to be something like that. And I knew that when we were talking about this, I wanted to talk about simulation theory also. And I just want to touch on it right now and say that, a lot of people are talking about simulation theory, and the more I look into near-death experiences, the more it seems like simulation theory is like kind of right.
Yeah.
It's just a feeling of, well, yeah, it is kind of like a simulation.
Dr.
Like,
Greg Braden.
watch near-death
experiences.
If you watch near-death experiences, it seems like that. They go back, they review their lives, they see how everything went, they see whether they accomplished what they needed to accomplish, they decide whether they want to go back or go back to the spirit world. It's like going in and out of a video game. It's like, I played a video game. Did I do what I wanted to do, or should I go back in?
Yeah, and
that's how they indicate.
And Billy Carson talks about this, and he talked about a scientist who discovered Indinkra codes, and I think that's how it's pronounced, Indinkra codes in nature that are pretty much like the computer code of a computer. And Greg Braden even elaborates on what they're doing. They're running these tests, and the computers are coming back and telling them that based on how our reality functions, it's starting to show that it's more of an illusionary reality. It's not the base reality. It's not the base reality. And Dr. Eben Alexander even discusses, and he says that it's pretty much like Plato's world of forms, that reality is the real reality, and this reality is the reality of which it's based off of that one, the real world. So that's why you can hear people talking in near-death experiences, talking about trees that were as tall as skyscrapers, or, amazing butterflies, and everything is alive and they can communicate with it telepathically and things like that. So this is just like a base reality. And to also just really quickly go back to the filter theory that you were talking about, I don't use the example of the internet, but yeah, I don't use the example that you use, but it's funny because it's pretty much the same thing. I use, it's like a radio. So it's like, I know that if I were to go inside the radio and start pulling wires out, maybe my radio wouldn't get, a good signal. Maybe it sounds staticky. It wouldn't work properly. But I also know that I can't go into the radio looking inside for a little man or woman who's talking, because that's not how the radio works. It's receiving signals from outside of itself.
And that's what we're basically saying here, is that if you look into near-death experiences and you go down that and you look at what's happening, you will arrive at the conclusion that the brain is either somehow an antenna for consciousness, or a residing place for it. That's the inevitable conclusion.
Right.
Yeah, the radio. So do you have an idea of where to go next? Because I was gonna I'm just kind of going on to random things.
Sure.
What things do you think are most important that we touch on?
So really quickly, we could just start by saying, where people can go to watch this stuff. So we already mentioned you guys can watch on YouTube. You can go to IANDS, or you can Google IANDS, IANDS, and the International Association for Near-Death Studies. You can look up or Google DOPS, the Division of Perceptual Studies. They even have some of the members of, one of the members of DOPS in a show on Netflix called Surviving Death. And you can watch that, and you can see how he goes into these stories for reincarnation in children. So we can go on that, but we can touch on one of the things I want to bring up are the actual common themes, things that happen during a near-death experience that happen.
Right. Same thing. Let's outline it for people.
Sure.
What happens over of these thousands of NDEs that Christian and I have both heard, hundreds of them at least, in first person, and we can tell you how they're all similar.
And I'm not going to go through I'm just going to go through the actual, I'm going to number them and then just go through what people commonly experience. So we have number 1, the out-of-body experience. So someone experiences leaving the body. Number 2, we have heightened senses. So people have heightened abilities, senses. They even pick up other people's thoughts sometimes. There have been veridical evidence where someone will actually recount something that someone has said to bring it up to that person after the experience is over, only to find out that that person didn't say it out loud, that it was in their head that they said it. So how could they have known that? And veridical evidence also shows that they're experiencing experiences away from where that body was and able to recount that information accurately. So they actually have a compiled list of documentation on that, on people who were able to do that. Number 3, intense and generally positive emotions or feelings. People talk about this all-encompassing love that they feel from a being. And a lot of people, number 4, experience passing through a tunnel or seeing a pinpoint of light which turns into a tunnel. That's not always the case, but it's very common. We have number 5, encountering a mystical or brilliant light. People will describe this very differently, and I like to elaborate and say that it's my understanding and theory that it's based on where that person's level of awareness is. So if someone is more religious, they will say they encountered angels. If someone else has a different understanding, they might say, oh, I saw a being of light. They never really mention seeing beings with wings or anything like that, but they always describe this beings of light, different variants of light too. So spirit guides and that type of stuff. Number 6, encountering other, number 7, a sense of alteration of time or space. Many near-death experiencers will mention that there was no sense of time, and they will often describe that everything was happening all at once. It wasn't like it was here, like how time functions here. And even though they're describing the story as if it was a linear sequence of events, that's not how it actually happened. They're doing that for us to understand, but that's why it makes it very hard to elaborate. Dr. Bruce Grayson says that trying to describe all this is kind of like trying to draw an odor with a crayon, which is very interesting.
Yeah, another explanation is because our words are made for physical objects.
Yes.
And time. Everything, all of our language is centered around time and physical objects.
Correct.
But in that world, time and physical objects aren't there.
Correct.
So that's very hard to understand, but it's real.
Yeah. And the life review, many people, not everyone has a life review. And I think that the life review is very important for certain individuals because my theory is that when this happens to someone, it depends on what was relevant for that person to experience, because people who have the life review have a very drastic change in their lifestyle afterwards. They do a lot of inner reflecting afterwards. Every near-death experiencer does a lot of inner reflecting, but I think it depends on what the person needed. That's my theory. But the person during a life review will experience all the consequences that they made, good or bad, from everyone's perspective. So even if you had a thought about someone, you didn't even physically say something, you had a thought, oh, I hate this person, oh, this person's a jerk, or you said something mean about this person, you will then see how your thoughts affected that person. You will then see how your thoughts made that person feel by actually becoming that person and feeling how that person felt. So that's the life review. And it's not out of punishment. People often say that they never feel that they are being judged by the all-encompassing loving being or any other beings that happen to be within the vicinity, that they are the only persons judging their experience. They're judging themselves. They're seeing where they could have done better and how much love they could put out, or how much love they lacked. No.
Right, I have a couple more to add to that. Are you almost done?
No. Yeah, we're almost done.
The description that it feels more real than reality. This reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that is prevalent in all of them.
Yes,
and it's very interesting to think about. But they all say that place feels more real than this real. And a lot of them that come back, they describe, I've heard a handful of them, at least 6 or 7, that say for months they're depressed after coming back because sunsets don't look as good anymore. Yeah. And yeah, sunsets don't look as good anymore, and this world feels muddy and weighed down and and not clear, and they can't experience love as easily. They have to try to experience love, whereas up there it felt like everything was made of love, and that every soul that they encountered was emanating love, and that the light that they encountered was emanating so much love, and it felt so good. And also they all felt like they were home.
Yes.
So not only did it feel like it was more real than this reality, it's like suddenly they woke up to clarity.
Yes.
Kind of like waking up from a dream.
Yeah.
Where this reality feels more real than the dream. Same thing. When they go to NDE, they're in a place that suddenly feels more real, and it's like they're waking up from this
Physical
reality
dream.
that we all share into greater reality.
Yeah.
Greater reality. And then they feel like it's home. And that's really important. They all feel like it's familiar. I've heard them describe many times that word familiar.
I've been here before.
This is the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been here before. I'm returning back. It feels like home. They don't want to leave. They don't want to leave. Every time they do a life review, they're kind of realize they have to go back, but they kind of fight it, and they resist. They say, "I want to stay here."
Yeah.
Even mothers that have children back on Earth.
Yeah. They say the love is the love is
they want
different.
to stay anyway. The love is they want to stay anyway. It's so, and I remember one mom being ashamed of that, or a couple that I watched. She was ashamed that while she was in NDE world, she actually wanted to stay and not even come back to her children, because it felt so good up there and so much better, but she decided to come back
because the love is more pure. They mentioned that, like, the love is so pure, so there's no words to describe it. And even one person had mentioned, like, even though they had children, they're like, oh, I know that they're going to come here. I want to stay here. I know that everything's going to be fine for them anyway. I'm going to stay here. So, yeah.
So that's really, really good to think about right now, is that the people that have passed on, think about that. The stories, if you watch NDEs, you'll hear what they go through in a life review. Imagine the people that have gone through life review and decided to keep going and die, or not really die, but go wherever they're going, and not come back to Earth. It's possibly the right choice, for them. That they're going to that place, and then whoever misses them, it's sad that they'll miss them for a little while on Earth, but those people will get back to that place also. And so it could be the right choice for people to die. And so it's a theory of mine that because there's a certain amount of people that have NDEs and come back, well, the rest of them may not be coming back. That's why they can't tell us their story.
Yeah.
So all the stories we have are just from people that came back. But the people that review their lives and go on, they probably are going on for a good reason, or and that's a comforting feeling for deceased relatives, that you might have lost. And I want to reiterate now that it's not comforting because I want it to be comforting. Like, I'm making up things so that I can be comforted. I never wanted to make up things so I could be comforted. That is not the reason I looked into NDEs, and that is not the reason that I believe that NDEs are real and this really happens after you die. I am always looking for the truth, and I just want that to be very clear. I don't need that comfort. I grew up my first 38 years of my life. I'm 39 now. First 38 years believing that it's going to be blackness and nothingness after death. That's what science has taught us. That the brain's creating everything we know, and as soon as our brain goes away, we're just nothing. We cease to exist. And yet inside, I know that that's like doesn't vibe well. I don't believe that. My inner feeling is that I will continue, and that is actually the truth, that you will continue, and that's what NDEs will show you if you just watch them.
Right.
So I'm not making this up so people can feel comforted about their loved ones. I'm telling you, this is what really happens, and it just so happens to be great news.
Yeah, really, for real. I mean,
as that position, Bob, or whatever, he said, this is excellent news for humanity.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is. And so just imagine, first of all, my life has been pretty happy, since I've learned all this. But now I live from a love first point of view, and everybody else likes that better too.
Yeah.
The way I live now. But furthermore, when like Christian and I both know about what really happens during the NDE and afterlife, we know.
I've had my
when
own out-of-body experience. Yeah, I've also went into an operation, and it's
exactly. I can't wait to talk about those. But I just want to say that when like we know, and the way you can know just by looking into it, you can actually come to the real answer, and you can know by watching NDEs.
Yeah.
When you will be very comforted. You will feel right about people passing away. You will feel like it's okay.
Yeah,
you will
there's
feel
no
like
going back. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So start, whatever you do, look into NDEs, watch the stories, realize what's going on. And then to continue let's just keep trying to sum up everything that happens objectively, in these stories.
Sure.
Let's try to capture everything. And one thing I've seen also is that I'm just going to throw in things. I've seen this a handful of times. Out of the hundreds that I've watched, there's about 6 people or so, a small handful, that described when they were going through the tunnel. And like Christian says, the tunnel can take different forms, but it is a tunnel in essence. It can be, but a lot of times people are going through the universe. They're out there and there's stars, and again, as Christian said, it's hard to translate what they experience into language and say that it's stars specifically, because it's a feeling of light. The light that they experience out there may not translate directly into what a star looks like here on our physical world.
Yep.
Maybe not. But it is light, and they're traveling towards the light, and they're going through a tunnel. And during that time in the tunnel, I've noticed that some people, and correct me if I'm wrong, but some people start to talk and interact with their deceased relatives while they're in the tunnel, on the way there. And then once they get there, then they are also having conversations with their deceased relatives.
Not always the case, but it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, in addition to talking to their deceased relatives, they're also sometimes talking to spirit guides that have been loosely defined as spirit guides, that are spirits there that are helping them, guide them. And sometimes it's somebody that they know, but other times it's a figure that just is comforting to them, perhaps. But it's a spirit guide.
Right.
And then they also encounter what they know to be. They encounter an entity that they know to be the source, or God, or Jesus, or all these other names that you can put on it, that is just the source. They know that they're encountering the source.
Right. Yeah. Because they can distinguish that being's energy from just a normal being that's a spirit guide meeting them, or a deceased loved one. Yeah.
And along with that, they also know for sure when they encounter a relative. It's not a question like, oh, I wonder if this is my deceased mom. There's never a question. They know for sure. And it goes along with how they describe this as more real than reality. They also know with 100% certainty that they are talking to that person. They feel the essence of that person at a deep level, even deeper than they can feel here.
I'd also
so part of their description. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say that something that keeps coming up again in near-death experience after near-death experience is the type of communication and how that's handled. Again, this goes along with heightened senses, but they always describe the communication as telepathic. Telepathic communication, and it's much faster, where we have to, down here we have to describe something to get someone to understand something, whereas over there it's just like instantly what the person means. There's no room for error. Not only that, but it seems that they could have conversations with that all-encompassing being, the other beings that are there, their deceased loved ones, all at once, and that kind of goes into everything is happening all at once. So it's just they're able to handle that input.
I want to caution both of us to not blow people's minds too much.
Sorry.
No, it's just, if you think about all these things together at once, like there's no time up there. That one already is very difficult to wrap your head around.
Right.
Let me just try to convince you of what that could feel like. Because I once got up recently to go get some water in my fridge, and by the time I got to my fridge, all the blood went out of my head, and I started to feel woozy, and I was blacking out. This happens to me because I'm really tall. I'm 6'2",
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times when I get up, I just start to pass out. And this has been a life experience of mine, and it's actually tied in with this stuff. When all that blood flowed out of my head, I was filling my water while the blood was flowing out of my head so I could hear the water coming down. I got into a timeless place. Time grinded to a halt with ferocity. And suddenly it felt eternal. And as this water was filling, I could hear it filling for what seemed like it could have been 2 months that I was in that moment. It could have been 2 months, or it could have been 2 weeks. Both felt kind of right.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I remember waiting forever for the water to fill. And then at some point I came back, and then time came back, and time was suddenly there again, and then it was just continuing to fill up. But this also happens in emergencies. This happened to me when I was on my motorcycle, and a big beam fell out of the back of the truck and was going along the ground, and I had a split second to react. I was going 80 miles an hour on my motorcycle. I was gonna die if I hit this beam. It was coming straight towards me. Time slowed down. This has been described in other people's emergencies too, so I'm hoping to appeal. I know some people have gone through this. There's one guy that did a rollover accident in the mountains, and he described unlimited time while he was in this rollover, and peacefulness too. So is a peacefulness. I also felt peacefulness when I was on the motorcycle. The beam was coming. Time slowed down. I felt like I had at least minutes, but it was only seconds. At least minutes to decide. I was making an informed decision of what to do, and I felt so calm, no panic whatsoever. So much time. It was quiet. It was peaceful.
Air Force pilot described that.
What's that?
There was an Air Force pilot that described that. He said he could even see like the drips of the can, like coming out of the can as the accident was happening, and he had time to analyze and think about it.
Yeah. So I'm trying to tell you that spiritual world is always here. It's always ready to tap into, and in those emergency situations, you start to go to that place almost to inform yourself a little. And when I passed out and hit the back of my head on the concrete floor and had that out of body experience, kind of out of body, I thought I went to this empty space, this black area, and I decided to continue living and came back. And that black area was this other place where I made a decision to continue living. And that's what I'm saying, is that when you get into emergency situations, or when you lose the blood flow out of your body, like you just stand up too fast, you can go to a spiritual place where time starts to go away. And this is what I believe is happening as well in the NDE experience. All NDEs describe a timeless place.
Yes.
So, yeah, as Christian pointed out, that's a critical element. It's a timeless place, and it's difficult to wrap your head around it. But another example is if you just get bored, time seems to take forever to go by. Another example is when you dream at night, time seems to just jump forward.
Yep.
So there are easy ways to see in our daily lives that time is kind of an illusion, and it's flexible and it changes. And in that spiritual place of NDE, there's no time. It goes
relative.
away.
Yeah. It's relative to the person experiencing it.
Yep, exactly. So maybe that's related to theory of relativity, Einstein, where if you go fast, you can actually travel in time. And that could be related, but nevertheless, no question that the physical world is tied with the spiritual world, like in so many facets.
Oh yeah.
And you can observe all the different facets that it's just tied right together. Should we try to get the rest of everything that happens? Oh yeah. I got one more.
Okay.
When they're going through the tunnel can take many forms, but when they look down, some of them describe seeing a collection of souls that are down there that are just living there. And I've heard this from about 6 people.
I've heard that.
It's minor, but they a collection of souls, and they say these souls are just living down there for whatever reason. They don't want to be part of the main thing. They want to live down there by themselves, whatever reason.
Yeah.
not going to get into the theories on that yet, but they see that as they're traveling, and then they get to this. Then they get to the bright light, and then they experience a magical, wonderful world.
Yes.
That feels like it's made of love, but that's also really hard to wrap your head around. So it's just so it's when the light comes towards them and the spirits come toward them, they feel love like automatically, and so nobody's it's not like this world, that that you don't feel love just automatically. It's like you have to work at it, and even NDers that come back from the ND world say it's so hard to find love in this world. You have to work at it,
because even that love doesn't compare.
From a parent, you said?
Oh no, I said because from that viewpoint, after experiencing that level of love doesn't compare. They're like loving your kids, loving your parents. It's not the same type of love, It's not the same. It's not all-encompassing, unconditional love. It's different. And
exactly. So that was one of the big revelations for me, and you'll discover it too when you look into NDEs, just by looking them up on YouTube. Is that the love feeling? It changes. It changes your way. It becomes a foundational thing that everything is kind of built on love.
Yes.
And there's some other conclusions you can make, like that it's the feeling of rejoining with our bigger, peace, if we're all part of
higher selves.
Yeah, higher selves, rejoining. It's feeling of love because it's connectedness. Rupert Spira is a great spiritualist. Rupert Spira, a wonderful person to listen to. He's just a wonderful human being. He's got so much love in him, and he's so compassionate. But when he describes the feeling of love, he says it's synonymous with connection. That when you experience love in real life, like you love a girlfriend or boyfriend, the reason you love them is because you are starting to realize they are the same thing as you. That they're the same consciousness. This is Rupert Spira's theory, and I believe this. That they're recognizing they're the same consciousness. And that's where the love comes from, is the rejoining of the two parts.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
If you think of death that way, you're rejoining with it. And even physicalists, traditional scientists, will tend to go to this explanation first, which is that, of course, it would feel like love because you're melting back into whatever we came from. And if love is connectedness, then you're just connecting again to the source. And so that's one model of looking at it. But the point is, it's overwhelming love in the NDE world. And the interactions are all loving. And there's it's described as light that's giving them this kind of feeling. These other souls, when they get to that bright place, when they travel through the tunnel, that's always some kind of great heavenly kind of experience, and it's different for everybody, but it can be a constructed world.
That's actually the next one. Yeah. At number 9, encountering otherworldly realms. And it's catered to the person, it seems.
This will be my last point, and then I'll let you talk on these. But the heavenly, as Eben Alexander describes, it's a heavenly realm, but I'm trying not to lose people. I don't want to heaven and hell so much. I want to say that it's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. It has trees and rivers and all the things that you think are beautiful. It has those, but they're even more beautiful than they are on Earth. And this is the way people describe it.
More real than real.
I've never experienced that part. When I almost died, when I hit my head on the back of the concrete, I went to a black place. And made a decision to keep living and came back. I didn't have experience of seeing lots of beautiful things. Never did that. However, a lot of NDEs experienced the black place that I went to as a first step. I've seen at least something like 4 or 5 firsthand recounts where they went to this black place and they were in this temporary place, and then suddenly the light came and opened up, and then they traveled through a tunnel. So it's almost could be considered like a staging area where I went to, which is just a kind of an empty black place. but I never saw the light and I never saw the tunnel. I didn't have to go there for whatever reason. I just came back. Maybe I wasn't in bad enough shape or whatever. And so anyway, once they get to the light source after they travel through the tunnel, they always experience like beautiful things. Sometimes it's music being sung by choirs, the best music they've ever heard, and it's more beautiful than music on earth, and beautiful naturescapes and everything. And then they're often like taken. Like I said, this is incredibly good news for all of humanity because this is around the corner for everyone, actually, and we'll get to that. There's not really, we'll get to that later, but there's not really a hell where people, if people are bad their whole lives, they don't get thrown into like a jail cell.
Apparently it's self-imposed. It's like self-imposed, like if,
right.
It depends on what the person believes. And
you need to be informed and actually look at the stories of NDEs, the first-hand recounts. Don't believe what your religion tells you. Because religion can go off track on this, and they can say that you'll be condemned to hell forever. But that's not what NDEs are telling us. That's not what the people are saying when they go through this. They go through, like Christian just said, they go through hell for like, it's almost like a cleansing kind of thing for a moment. But they're able to ask for permission to get out of there. They're able to ask to be saved, and people end up just doing that. They ask, if you were in hell and you were desperate, you might say like, God help me. It might come to you. There's nothing else to try. Please help me. Please get me out of here.
There are some atheists who talked about that. Yeah, they didn't believe in anything.
At the moment they say that, please help me, that's when the light comes and takes them out of there. And I just wanted that to be clear. We'll get into that more, but the real reality is most of us are waiting, are going to encounter this heavenly place, regardless of whether we go through that hell experience. That only happens for it's only 3% of people or something. And we'll get into that more specific, but most of it is just this heaven thing. And so when you're in that heaven place, you're also going to be guided by some spiritual guide, or it could be a relative. I think it can be either somebody you don't know, or it could be somebody you do know. And do you have something to add on that?
Yeah, just as far as there are many times that the person can encounter someone they don't know, only to come back and go through like family photos to be like, oh my God, that was the guy I saw. That was my great grandfather. What? And there are many times where the nurses know about this a lot more, because nurses are closer to patients than doctors are. But there are stories of nurses have shared that, for instance, there was a scenario where this guy was dying and the family specifically asked not to share that his sister had passed away. And they said, don't tell him anything. And they have this thing in hospice when people are dying, they tend to, when they're getting close to the end, they even hand pamphlets out for this, because this is how much of a phenomenon, this is how much it happens. It happens so often. They have pamphlets for this, and they know that when someone starts having deathbed visions and they start seeing deceased loved ones, that it's nearing the time for them to go. And in his particular case, he was having conversations with people who weren't there, and the nurse asked him who he was talking to, and he mentioned he was talking to his deceased loved ones. But he said, it's funny though, because I was talking to my sister and she's not dead. Meanwhile, the nurse is just goosebumps all over, because they were instructed not to tell him that his sister had recently passed away, because they wanted to soothe his passing.
I want to reiterate right now, that's such an important story, Christian, and the theme is so important that they're talking with deceased relatives pretty much all the time. I'm talking like 90% of the time. I don't know about the other 10%. My feeling is that it's like the vast majority. They're always talking to deceased relatives, and like Christian said, there are distinct examples, and I've heard many more, where they didn't realize somebody had died, but they end up talking to them in the spiritual place in their NDE. They talk to them, and then they come back, and then they finally realize that person was actually dead.
It's a type of
and so it's shocking. That's a shocking element. It shockingly points to the fact that it's a shared realm that is not made up.
And it counts to vertical evidence. Yeah, and there are many stories like that. And Dr. Bruce Grayson talked about many of the cases, and I'll share that video with you, and I'll also put the video up, put it in the description so you guys can see it, where he discusses the many types of vertical evidence cases that he's come across. In one particular case, a nurse came to visit a person who was having a near-death experience. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "I came to fluff your pillow one last time. And I want you to go back and tell my parents that I'm sorry about the red car. I'm sorry I crashed the car, the red car specifically. Sorry about the red sports car." So he went back, told the nurse, again, goosebumps, freaked the nurse out. And they had found out that that nurse had died in a car accident. She was given a gift, red sports car, and she crashed it first week that she got it. Another experience with a young boy who encountered his young sister who was in college, who said to say sorry to the parents, to her parents and everything, and that everything would be fine. And he went back, told his parents. The parents got spooked, immediately called the college trying to get a hold of her, and they found out that she had died. So you have these experiences where people think that that person is alive, only to come back to find out that that person recently passed away, which is very interesting.
Yes, and I want to jump in here now to say that if you have any questions of whether these stories are real, I want to reiterate that my assistant, my ex-personal assistant, who actually had a near-death experience, she also visited her dead grandma, and then came back and talked about it. But it was a deceased relative that she visited, and I have first-hand experience with hearing her story and the authenticity of that, and that it was that is no coincidence, and it's not made up. It's all these people are actually encountering their dead relatives,
Yes.
not alive ones. Yeah. So that's a strong theme.
And sometimes.
So I was just
sorry.
continuing to recount. Sorry, it's breaking up just a little bit, but I was just recounting the actual adventure that they go on when they're there, and so I was, they're going through this beautiful place. They're guided by, one of their spiritual guides or a person that they know. Like I said, almost every time a deceased relative,
right?
And then they finally come to. They have these conversations. They also a lot of times report that they suddenly know all the answers to all the kinds of questions that they have.
That's the next
about,
one.
How the universe works.
Number 10, encountering or learning special knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they unanimously report that they suddenly know everything. I've had times like that where I just had great insights, and suddenly I felt like, maybe even while I was high on marijuana, like I just suddenly felt like I knew all these deep answers, and it all connected for me for some reason. But when I come out, you have varying degrees of being able to explain that to other people, or even convey the knowledge that you. And so they do have trouble conveying it when they come back.
It's hard.
But I have to preface that and say, aside from the fact they have trouble conveying it, they come back as clearly leveled up human beings.
Right.
Like in every regard. They've got more confidence,
more love.
They're more love. Yeah, they're love centered. They're
less materialistic.
Grounded, less materialistic. They're better human beings all around. And so all that knowledge and stuff that they were zapped when they were up there in NDE that they got, but they're not quite able to explain it in words. It's clearly evident in their behaviors and the way they act. It's not a false confidence like you're taught by your mom, to pretend to be confident. The confidence from the NDE people is the most real that you can possibly imagine. And Eben Alexander, which is one that Christian talks about and looked into, and I've looked into him, that had bacterial meningitis and was a physician himself, went through this incredible NDE experience. And now when he talks about it, he's one of the best people I like to watch talk. And I watch all the people talk. I like to watch Sam Harris because he's an excellent speaker, and just everybody. I love to watch great thinkers. Eben Alexander, in my opinion, trumps all those, which is shocking to me.
He makes good
because
good.
It's just so
he can elaborate
it's just so
better.
He just flows from him. He's got like a stream of consciousness going on this subject, and it's not it's not intellectualized and tried to make into any tricks. He just conveys it raw in the raw place. The basically it's right after you see, and you're seeing nature and you have a guide, you're then brought to this life review that they all have. And the life review is to, like we've said a few times, to review everything that happened in your life, at least all the significant parts.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's a timeless place, so it's not exactly like, oh no, we only have 2 minutes to review everything. It feels like you can review everything. And so most people describe it as though they've relived all the significant parts of their life where they've affected somebody. And there's a few specific stories that come to mind. One of them is that she was checking out in a grocery line. And tell me if you've heard this one, Christian. But she was shown this in her NDE, and it was the most significant experience of her NDE life review. That there was somebody trying to buy groceries, and there was a mom, and she didn't have enough money for something, and she was getting ready to put something back. Didn't have enough money, and the
penny.
person behind said, oh, here's $1.
Yeah.
I understand what you're going through. And at the time, that the person that just gave her the $1 is the one having the NDE. The person that helped that lady out is the one having this NDE. And she said at the time she didn't think anything of it. She didn't think that it was a big deal. She thought it would barely help. But what actually happened, what was shown to her in her NDE, is after the girl got the $1, in her NDE, she was reliving from the girl's perspective that got the $1. She was reliving that person's life. And she could see all these events that happened afterwards where her life just got better and better as a result of that, giving that $1. Just giving that $1.
And she ended up doing the same in kind. Yeah.
It's like the pay it forward concept. If you've seen the movie Pay It Forward, that's exactly real. That is what is described in the NDE life review. And the most significant times were those small things where they just did something to help out their fellow human, just in a small, compassionate way. But even though it just seemed like $1, it actually blew up after that. And I've often come to this conclusion in other areas, and I like to say the phrase macro is the same as micro. And that may be a little bit of a technical phrase because I'm a programmer, but I like to say that even the smallest thing that you do that's based on love can grow incredibly large and take over. That even if it's a small thing of giving a nickel to somebody, but it comes from a place of love, that those things grow and flourish, and they explode. And so it's encouraging in respect that it's not about the amount of things you do or how much you attribute, like how much money we all have. Like in America, it's always about the number of money that you have, and it's not about the number. In the NDE, when you're reviewing your life review, they all say it's about how much love you expressed, and they all realize that the whole point of that life was to see how much love they could express. And so people reviewing often say they're evaluating their own selves. There's no judgment from the people that are with you where you're reviewing. There's no judgment put on you whatsoever. Even if you've done horrible things, they're not judging you at all. You're just reliving what your horrible things did to other people. And horrible could possibly be subjective. That you're just reliving the effects of what you did to everybody, and you're reliving it from their point of view. So I think if you have a mindset of separateness, like school has taught us, that we're all separate, and what you do to another human does not affect you. They're a separate thing. You can hack on them all day long like a sociopath, and be a serial killer and kill people, and nothing affects you. That mindset is bound to encounter a rude awakening when you get into the NDE world and you are reliving those things that you did to other people while you're them.
Oh yeah.
And so it's bound to be a rude awakening. For if you feel like you're disconnected, every NDE, thousands of them, and probably every single one, but of the thousands that we know, they actually experience what they've done to other people, and that happens pretty much every time, right?
Yeah. And I'd like to add also is that, and it connects with this, is that people who go through the NDE are given this understanding of oneness, that we are all one from each other, or one with each other. And what we call source or God or whatever you want to call it is not separate from us. Even though they can describe it as like a separate entity, it's as if we come from this being and we are this being as well. And with that understanding of oneness, from that point of view, it makes no sense to hurt another and not treat them with love, because it is you. And you're only hurting yourself whenever you choose to act not out of love.
So well said. And the my biggest objective with doing this podcast and the others that we're going to do on this is to get you to switch your mindset from separateness to connectedness. And I'm telling you, not only is that the real model of how things really work, and you need to discover it for yourself by looking up NDEs on YouTube and seeing what happens when people die.
Yeah.
You need to adopt the feeling of connectedness, because that's what really happens. The people that have the feeling of separateness and live their lives by that are always rudely awakened during these experiences. And Christian and I will talk about the lots of experiences where people that are hardcore materialist people that think that it's blackness after death and the brain's creating everything, consciousness is an illusion. When they first die and they first start experiencing their NDE, they're shocked and they're in a frame of trying to grasp what's happening, and they're baffled, as you could imagine, if you're non-spiritual completely, and you're suddenly looking at your body.
I have Oh no, I was gonna just say I have a question for you. It's a good question, and it's a question that everyone can ask themselves. And I actually had a conversation with a skeptic, and this stopped him for a moment. And I was just like, because he was so against this, and we were having this conversation, and I said, listen, prove to me right now that this is real and we're having this conversation. I want definitive proof that we're actually having this conversation right now. Prove it to me. And he laughed and he couldn't do it. So we have to really start to ask the question, what is real? Because how can you prove that this experience, what we're like, you watching this video right now, is real? How are me and Kevin having this conversation? How could we prove to you that this conversation is really happening?
Yeah, and so more importantly, and from my opinion, even more grounded, is that not only you can't prove what's real, not only that, but the theories that we're all operating under now, the materialist only viewpoint, you can't prove that's real either. And they haven't done a good job at all. In fact, there's a big hole right there where they're like, how does body create consciousness? How does the brain create consciousness? There's no possible idea. Not only is there no possible idea, they're simultaneously ignoring the body of things happening after death. All the stories of NDEs, they're trying to ignore it just to cling on to the old theory of materialism.
And people say it's not evidence. People say it's not evidence, it's just anecdotes. But we use word of mouth and anecdotes in science, also in a court of law. Why do we use it?
Yeah, absolutely. The evidence thing is a thing that people say to shut down conversations.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I'll say about that. Okay, if people say there's no evidence, just they're trying to shut down the conversation.
Actually, sorry, go ahead. Real quick.
There's plenty of evidence. That's what I want to say. Yeah.
And real quick, there's a scientist who actually said this about how skeptics tend to function, and he names it in 4 steps. Number 1. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind is already made up. Number 2, what the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them or talk about. 3, if you can't attack the data, attack the people. Number 4, do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble and nobody will know the difference anyway. And I had to write that down after I heard that. Yeah.
To NDEs. That's what most people do. Yeah, those things. Yeah, so true. Yeah, and by the way, you said the term veridical evidence. I was hoping you could define that for me and for other people.
So yeah, veridical evidence is whenever you have a situation where someone has a near-death experience or out-of-body experience. It doesn't have to happen in the near-death experience. It could just be an out-of-body experience. when the person is able to recount information that they couldn't have gotten unless they were actually there. So let's say Sarah has an out-of-body experience or near-death experience, and she leaves her body and she goes to where her mom is 2,000 miles away and is able to recount what she's doing, what she's saying, the conversation she's having, what the other person is saying. Another example is having a near-death experience in an emergency room. You're able to go a few floors down and recount a conversation that a pair of doctors are having. Then after you go back into your body, you go tell the doctors, hey, you were having this conversation at this time in private in this room, and this is exactly what you said. And then it freaks the people out because like, how did you know that? That's vertical evidence. Or like the stories I shared with the car and going back and they have to verify that information.
And I want to be clear that you don't even have to accept those stories that are vertical evidence. For physicians, they're convinced. Like I mentioned before, the physicians that observe this stuff are convinced, and they're trying to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're up to this day, they're more and more fierce about it, talking about it.
Yeah.
But even if you don't accept the body of veridical evidence where they can see their own operations being done on their body, it's still profoundly significant in so many ways. And there's so much other evidence too that we haven't even touched on, but one of them is children versus adults, and religious versus non-religious, all experiencing the same themes.
Right.
The children don't experience childlike themes. The children experience a mature near-death experience in the same way adults do, and they come back from it much more mature human beings. In fact, they've matured at a rapid rate. They're
especially young children, because they haven't been influenced by religion in our societies yet. Their brains haven't developed to that stage. So it's just amazing.
For that, I just got to say, personal experience. My personal assistant, she was 18. She was 18 when she had her near-death experience, and she was one of those I've considered a childlike category where she was confused about this. She had never read about NDEs.
Right.
She was never spiritual. Her family universally thought she was crazy, and she still is left with this. That was the real world that I was just in, and this is the fake world. And she still has that in her mind, and she can't get rid of it. And she's open to death, and she wants it to come back. She wants to go back there, and this is not influenced from her by her childlike experiences, of her experiences growing up until now. It was very clear when I was hearing her stories that she wasn't culturally disposed to having an NDE.
Right.
And that also will be clear when you research all the other NDEs, that after time you will figure out they're not culturally created. That some of the symbols and stuff are culturally different, but it's the superficial outer parts that are different. The essence of the whole experience is the same across all cultures. And whether you are a child or an adult, or whether you're religious or not, you go through the same themes. And half or more, probably almost everyone that experiences NDE is shocked that it's happening in the beginning. I've heard dozens of stories where when they first saw their body, they were like, "Oh my God, what has just happened?" And they're like, "I think I'm dead." Mm-hmm. And then they say, and then they just and then they're like, I think I'm dead. And then they accept it, and then they start to just let go and start to go with it. They start to go with it. But others have fought in it at that point.
Yeah.
Others have seen their body and said, "Oh my God, I think I'm dead." And then they've said, I don't, that's not possible. That's not possible. It's not possible to be outside of my body. And they resist it. And those people, there's a lot of those people. Those people get scared and they start to have a hellish experience. But it's not, just to be very, very clear, it is not like religious books like, "I'm putting you in hell, so you have to suffer." Nothing like that. It is that they're just scared and confused of how this could possibly be happening. They're resisting it. Resisting spirituality because of how we were of our upbringing. We're taught that everything created by the brain, that there can't be this thing happening. So they resist it, and then they get real scared, and then they start to go through this process of well, actually they often, from ones I've read, and you can maybe correct me, if you've seen anything else, but they tend to stay around their body area, and they're just really confused and upset and not knowing what's going on, and it's a little terrifying for them.
Sometimes they get upset because they try to talk to people and they're like, aren't you listening to me? Hello. And then the doctors or the nurses can't see them. They can't explain. So then they
wasn't that in the movie with Kevin Bacon, the Flatliners?
I don't think I've seen it. I haven't seen that movie. I don't think I've heard of it.
It's a little older.
Seen it.
But yeah, exactly. They actually will talk to the people around them, and they'll be confused, like why aren't they listening and talking back?
Yeah.
And they're just resisting because of their mindset of they're transitioning from this, all of our learnings. This is what we're trying to do, is get you out of that mindset that's actually wrong. The materialists, where brain creates everything, and because the people are confused. But so what happens after that? I think we should both discuss this. They're confused for a little while, and then I think eventually they embrace it, or they get forced into the tunnel, and then they're terrified while they're going through the tunnel.
It varies.
Is that right?
Yes, and it varies from person to person, because sometimes there is a guide that shows up. Sometimes there's a guide right away, or a deceased loved one to help them and explain things. Sometimes their beliefs are so strong, because it's my understanding that that reality is a very conscious reality. So as the person starts to think a certain way, they can attract or create worlds or certain things to happen. So the people who are very like closed-minded, or like, this is impossible, this isn't real, can put themselves in a self-imposed location where it could be very uncomfortable. It could be very fear-based. There's some people who think that, maybe they don't believe in anything really, but they weren't necessarily the nicest person, so they think they're going to hell. So they end up in that location, and to them, it's apparently real. So now they're like, well, if this is real, God help me, save me. And that's usually when it opens up, when they decide. And if it helps, there is a situation. There was a person who had a near-death experience who was shown, kind of like all those people like stuck in that area that you mentioned. And she asked Source or the being, what is that? What are all those people? Why are they suffering? Why are they stuck there? And the being replied, free will. That they chose not to. And they can, just like everyone else, choose to open up and leave that place if they want to. But it's a self-imposed thing. So it varies from person to person. I think that's why different people, not everyone has the same heaven or location. Sometimes it's a forest, sometimes it's a beach, sometimes it's somewhere else. It depends on the person and what they want. And it seems to be the consciousness creates the reality around them. That's as I understand it.
Excellent. Yeah. And I definitely think we should dive deeper into the hellish experiences to be very clear on that for people, because to me, that's simultaneously terrifying and also totally confusing.
Yeah.
And also totally misled by religion, that you go to hell to be punished. Totally misleading. It's not that way in the NDE world.
No.
You're not being punished. And so, and like Christian said, it's mostly about what your own consciousness decides for yourself in a way. But it is interesting that somebody that first going into NDE, there's a period of confusion, which makes sense since we're all so indoctrinated to believe there's nothing after death, that it's just blackness if the brain creates everything, that you would be confused. But it's interesting that even after you leave your body and your pure soul and you're in that place, you can still have the confusion, and that they do. Their souls are like confused for a good while this whole thing is taking place. And I feel like about 30% or maybe 20% of people have this confusion thing going on, and then it takes them a while to accept it. They go through the process, and as they're traveling or something, some people have gone through the whole tunnel being terrified, and the whole thing is hellish. As Christian said, that they're making their own hell because they're resisting that this could all be even possible.
And
they're resisting. Yeah.
Yeah, there also Penny, the person you were describing who went in the grocery store. who gave the person money, she encountered her deceased grandmother, who was giving her answers to her questions. And her grandmother said that you already know all this. You learned this in school, that energy can't be created or destroyed, that you don't actually die and there is no death. It's an illusion. And she was struggling. She's like, oh, okay. She had to like really, during her experience, rethink about all this, because her experience started with her encompassing herself in a dark void-like shell. It was like she could feel like an actual wall around herself where it was black, and she couldn't really necessarily escape and get out of it. And she was shown and given the understanding that she did that to herself, not just with her own beliefs, but in her own normal waking life, because she separated herself from everyone in her life. She didn't get close to everyone after her first relationship had failed, or her marriage had failed. She wanted to separate and create a wall from herself, from the world and everyone else. So when she had her near-death experience, she created her own wall around herself because of her beliefs. Those were her beliefs and her belief system embedded in her subconscious beliefs, whatever you want to call that. But that's what ended up creating that first initial experience for her.
Yeah, and even though that connectedness is the real root of the way things work up there, at least at that next level, like who knows beyond that? Let's save that for another day. But at least in the NDE world, as is being shown to us by all these people going through it, that connectedness is the real way it works. And but even though that connectedness is the real way, that you can still create your own little non-connectedness world if you want. That once you get up there, there's people that are allowed to live, and that's where those several handful of people look down and they see a collection of souls. Those people are allowed to live in a separate place if they want, feeling no separateness. And as Christian pointed out, when you ask the source or you ask one of your spirit guides, they will tell you they're allowed to live there. It's free will. That the answer of free will comes across, and I've heard that many times from different stories, that you have a free will to remain separate. And I guess my urge is like, our current science is telling us things are separate, but the reality is it's connectedness, and some people get confused and they end up being separate. It's like it's going to do you a lot better to embrace the connectedness feeling. It makes your life better in all different ways. But once you get up into that place, you're prepared more. You're more likely to just go straight to the heaven place, and instead of being confused and wondering. But you always have a choice. And from my understanding, and I've read about hellish NDEs for a while, that there are people that actually do. There are souls that actually do. Can you call them people? When they're off in the ND world, are they still people?
I guess I like to say being. We're all beings, because I often like to say we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. So.
It's definitely a being. It's definitely a being, a spirit or a soul. But all those words have stigma to them, so I'm just trying to avoid the stigma words.
No, oh yeah, I understand. Yeah.
This isn't foo-foo spirituality. This is like what you really are when you go up there, whatever that is. In essence. And
for the people who are more scientific minded, I'm not going to go into it, but just if you start researching vibration and energy, a lot of this starts to make more sense. We're obviously made up of energy, and it's just energy. So energy being, or whatever, without the physical shell you want to call that.
Yeah. But anyways, when you're up there in your soul, you can decide whether you want to live in connectedness or separateness. Pretty much most people decide to go to connectedness. There's a handful of people that choose to live in separateness or in the hellish place. And there are people that want to live there. And from what I've read, the conclusion is like they want that is their heaven, that they're okay with. And it's a hellish thing. It's like the experiences there are vivid, and we're going to get into those. I don't know if now is the right time, but one example is just like, being transferred from freezing cold, freezing slate to hellish hot fire, and just oscillating back and forth between those things and experiencing the horror of it and the pain, and everybody's screaming and it's horrible. Those are actual experiences people have in NDEs, in the hellish parts of it. And some souls choose to stay there, and I don't feel like I can even speculate on why some souls choose to stay there, but I can say that it seems clear that souls have the choice. They decide whether they want to. Yeah, and anytime they say, "Please save me," the light comes down. This is repeated in at least 4 stories I've read, where the light just comes for wherever they are. It takes them out of there and takes them to the connected place where there's all this feeling of love and there's no torture at all. It's the opposite. Right. So you have a choice all the time. But there's the hellish thing can be spurred on by confusion as well, of just not realizing that that's what's awaiting.
I always just likened it to the soul. Every soul, every person is at their own level of awareness. So even if we can't understand why someone would choose that particular experience, that's a different awareness level. They're just at a different level, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if what the evidence is showing us and is indicating that we're all eternal, in the grand scheme of eternity, they have forever to figure it out. So that's what I always say, just based on what I've learned.
I'm gonna finish up the very last part of the last part of the NDE. So while they're going through the life review, and they've experienced the emotions and feelings from every point of view, from every person they've affected in this life on Earth, and they experience their whole life going through. This is often described in NDEs. When I grew up, I heard about it, but I just dismissed it. It's like your life flashes before your eyes. That's what they say. That term is nowhere near good enough to describe what happens. That term is a writing off term. It's like, I don't want to talk about it or think about it, so I'll just say life flashes. That's stupid. It's so much more in depth than that. You experience the feelings of everybody that you've ever interacted with from their point of view, and you learn from it, and you realize what you put them through, and you learn what you learn. Yeah, I can't wait for all those people to learn what they put me through. God damn.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, you go through the whole thing, you feel it all. There's no judgment from when you're doing it. Nobody's, again, very important to point out, because religion says there's judgment. Religion, that part's wrong. There's no judgment. It's not. They're not doing a life review to decide whether you go to hell. Right. This is not like humans in their courts. Their courts of law, which are horrible. It's not a court where you're being judged as a bad person. You're going to go to a bad place and be punished. You always get to go wherever you want, and then for the vast majority, it's just to go into the heavenly realm that awaits. And so it's pure love in the environment where you're reviewing your life. Pure love and acceptance. They accept everything, and you're the one that's looking at what you've done and deciding whether your soul has gotten like the right things out of it in some way. And reincarnation is another key element that is understood by near-death experiencers. When they go through near-death, they almost always understand reincarnation is the way it works when they come back. And so people like Eben Alexander, but many others, individuals, will explain reincarnation is the way that we come back into a human body. We live a life so that our soul can go through all these growth experiences and learn. And again, you can tie this to simulation theory, which people talk about, like Elon Musk and all those tech people. They say simulation theory. It's very similar to what happens in an NDE. The life on Earth is like an experience where you're growing and you're getting all this growth for your soul. I'm not totally clear on that, but that's the way it's described. And when you come out of a human life, then it seems most likely you're going to go back into another human life, or maybe a non-human life. I'm not sure about that, but for sure you live. There's conclusions you will make when you watch all this. Is that one is that the spirit is timeless and it's indefinite. It doesn't end. You
Right.
don't ever cease to exist. The feeling that you have right now, if you dig deep, that you're never going to die. That I've always been telling people since I was a little kid that I had that feeling. That feeling is true. That your soul never dies. It just keeps, and it's in a timeless place. So once you wrap your head around the timeless thing, like I was trying to explain earlier, then you realize that your soul is just always existing. And so there's been many human lives, and there's also been many reports of young children that remember their past lives. This has been happening for a long time. Children will be able to describe what happened in the past life. Their soul actually was in another human body, and so it is accurate to say that human bodies are like vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And NDE themselves described that when they came back from their NDE, that this human body is a vehicle. It's just a vehicle for a short period of time. And there's some people that have gone through this human life and have died. And there's a kid that remembered the experience of dying in this airplane accident that was verified. That there was another human life that had died in an airplane accident in the war. And the kid remembered all the vivid details and described it. And the reason that happens is because when you're a kid, you actually are not as you don't have as many, that separation aspect of your separate consciousness that is an illusion that we all have. And that's important to bring up.
Yeah.
That you're not stupid for thinking that separateness seems to be the thing. That actually that is a real illusion, and life is mostly illusions.
Yeah.
And that is one thing I think is for sure, is life is mostly illusions. But the separateness thing is easy to come to. It feels like we're separate. I don't feel like I can read your thoughts right now, at least not objectively in a measurable way. I don't feel like that. I feel like we're separate. So it's there is different theories for why we feel that way. And the major theory that I've heard the most is that we're intentionally have amnesia so that we can basically sink deeply into this experience and believe this is everything, so that we give it our all.
Yeah.
We everything's on the line. We really go for it. Yeah.
If it was an open book test, there would be kind of no point to it. And a lot of people in their near-death experiences who come back and they're given information on the understanding of the universe is that the earth is like a grain of sand compared to the other worlds and realities out there. And that the earth is it's like a school, especially a school to learn how to love and be more compassionate. And we come here to forget who we are, to remember who we are. But that slowly, I think what I call it is like a veil, I guess, is slowly thinning, because there are some people who are starting to actually remember past lives normally. It also starts off, children are the ones that are on the forefront of this, but they also say that the children will then eventually stop remembering, and it kind of like fades off as they incorporate, this life that they're living right now, and that becomes their main focus. But I honestly,
there's one good analogy for this, Christian, that maybe you agree with. When you watch a movie, I experience sinking into the movie and becoming the movie when I watch a movie.
Exactly.
I love it, really.
Me too.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's an illusion created in doing that. When you're sinking into the movie, I for a moment believe I'm the characters. I forget that I'm Kevin sitting looking at his TV screen. That is, by the way, an illusion. So
that's a good analogy.
Lots of illusions. Right, and it's perfect because you sink into a movie. You forget for a moment that you're actually observing a movie. You feel like you're in the movie.
Yeah.
That is what's happening in its daily.
Even video games too. Like you're like, I am this character. You kind of forget that you're watching the screen. Yeah.
And coincidence that we would create all these video games and movies that are kind of like simulations.
Yeah.
And then people are now theorizing that this world is like a simulation, and they're right according to NDEs and all the reports. And so that it's kind of like at least Rupert Spira would say that he's a great introspectionist, very aware person that explains his own theories that are based on his own observations of how his inner awareness is working, but he rejects modern science. But he seems to have most of this right.
Mm-hmm.
And one theory he has is that, you know, it's one big consciousness, and it's got lots of dreams going on.
Mm-hmm.
You could look at it this way. It's kind of scary to think, kind of mind blowing to think about this. But one big consciousness and having lots of dreams, just like we dream at night. And by the way, dreams are to this reality as this reality is to the NDE reality in terms of realness. From when you look into it, that when you wake up from a dream, it feels like more real. It's more coherent.
Mm-hmm.
Things happening, and it's just more real. It's
Right.
the best way to describe it. And when you go up into NDE, it's even more real. It's more real. It's like relative to how a dream was. So it could be considered, and that's verified. If you just start watching NDEs, you'll understand that it's more real up here in the NDE world. And so it could be that it's just a level of experiences. I mean, I can see levels, levels of experiences that are happening. And even when we're at this level, we're making other levels, which are movies and video games,
Mm-hmm.
where we can experience yet another kind of like a dream. It's just another adventure that our soul goes on, or our spirit, whatever our essence is that we are. We love to do those things. We love to go into a movie and experience somebody else's life. And so we can make all these simulations, and we can have dreams. And then this upper thing is making these simulations. And so it kind of could be like there's one mind, kind of making a whole bunch of simulations, and they're kind of trickling down at different levels.
Right.
Is one way you could think of it, but that's kind of mind blowing. It's nope, probably not everybody's going to swallow that right away. It's
and the thing is, even to think about this stuff or even talk about it, it gets challenging, because I grew up initially, I was Catholic, but it wasn't until I let go of that, because even the questions I would ask in class, they just didn't make sense to me, and it didn't sink in. And letting go of religion was like felt like a giant weight just came off my shoulders, and things started to make more sense.
I never had to do that.
Huh?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I never had to religion. I never had it on me in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, personally not a fan, but of religion in particular. But there are, I think there are key elements in there that are accurate in terms of like loving each other, talking about this oneness with each other. And there's something that I read that kind of really got me thinking, and maybe it'll help someone out, or if it's too much, we can cut this out. But it's something I read, and it said that religion expects you to learn from other people's experiences. Spirituality expects you to obtain your own personal experience. Religion hates spirituality. Religion encourages you to study other people's opinions and eventually accept them as your own, while spirituality expects you to investigate, organize, and receive the truth and the views from within yourself with no exterior influence, which usually all stem from fear.
Very good.
Which is interesting. And
very good, yeah. And Rupert Spear, who I was mentioning, he's a spiritualist by that definition. He looks inside himself to find the truth. He doesn't believe what somebody tells him is the truth.
Exactly. That's exactly the case. And, religion's like, no, don't do that. We have the texts, we have the stuff. Don't go within yourself. And what's very interesting, I'm only going to touch on this for a moment, is that if you actually go back in history and look at the Cathars, they were actually considered like the first shamans or spiritualists, and the church wiped them out. And they were the ones who were talking about going within yourself, finding the oneness within all. And Mary Magdalene was apparently a Cathar, and they have a much different story than what we were told, which is very interesting. But they were almost all wiped out.
Yeah, there's I think there's infinite depth when you go inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very fascinating that you can live your life being an external world in this country and this society, like in America, that's where I grew up, and you can go seek external situations to learn from, travel to all the places and see what things look like and learn about how life actually works by just seeing everything outside. But you can also just stay in a single room and never go anywhere physically, and you can keep delving deeper into your own inner soul, and you can keep exploring in the same unlimited fashion.
I think
as
it
you can
goes on
explore.
forever. I think there's no
Yeah,
end to our
forever.
expansion. Yeah.
Yeah, NDEs will verify that. And again, you got to watch near-death experiences to understand what happens after you die, when you transition. But they say the same thing. It indicates the same thing, that you've got this soul that's so infinitely deep, and it's connected to the source, and so you can go into yourself at any time, and you can dive incredibly deep and get all the realizations that you could ever seek, I would think.
Yeah.
And I personally, when I started practicing karate, I was 19 years old. I'm 39 now, and I practiced for 16 years and was a national competitor. But the way I practice karate is by going inside myself. Karate is a very internal exploration thing through things like meditation, but I never called it meditation. It's just you see how deep your well goes when you're practicing. When you think you're tired,
That's a good
and
way to
you
put
can't
it.
go on further, you change your mindset to realize that you're not actually tired. You change your mindset. You explore the ways that you can just rise up and do incredibly things that other people wouldn't believe are possible physically.
Right.
And it is possible by going deep inside and exploring. And so, me personally, I got spirituality from karate by doing hard physical labor and changing my mindset and doing that sort of things. And I had some visions and things that happened to me through hard physical labor. But I see your cat back there. I haven't seen your cat.
That's one of them. Yeah, that's Stormy, and the other one's chilling in a pull-out
Was that a
chair.
vision or was that a real cat? Just kidding.
Yeah. And
So anyway, I ended up exploring my own internal personal self, and most of my exploration, my growth has been internally looking inside and figuring out truths by going inside. And I don't tend to believe other people, which is why I really mainly because other people end up doing things like propaganda.
yeah,
How did we come to this, materialist only viewpoint? It's through propaganda. It's through people clinging on to their beliefs without looking at the evidence. Like we were talking, like Christian was saying about skeptics, what they go through. There's techniques that they do to whatever. They're just trying to get ahead. They probably have a separateness mindset and are trying to get ahead and stick with their theory and not stick with truth. The point is, if you listen to other people about what's real, including us, I would say, even though we're much more, we're telling pure truth in this. I'm definitely telling all pure truth in this, but you still shouldn't believe us. You should still go look
always do
at
your own
firsthand
research. Yeah, do your own
together
research. Always.
YouTube. You just really just start watching anytime. It's so much fun. You just get dinner and you watch a YouTube near-death experience while you're eating dinner, and it makes you happier in the end. It really does. And you discover the real truth of what happens. It's so fulfilling. Yeah, so fulfilling. I think Christian and I both. That's why we do it all the time, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to just say that first of all, I've been so excited about this podcast because we're both so interested in near-death experiences and have been researching them for a while. And I haven't really gotten a person that is open to the subject to really talk about it with.
Yes.
The only people that I talk about it with actually I talk about it with everybody, including my mom, who is the least open of spirituality,
Right.
and she's older and is set in her ways. But I've opened her up to this, and basically what I told her is like, Mom, there's a lot of stories of near-death experiences. It's very compelling. I said, they all say love is what matters. That you might want to just, focus on showing love for the rest of your years and be open to what happens after death. And then she said, that sounds like a good idea. So she actually agreed. But most of the people that I talk to can't engage in a conversation, and none of them have watched near-death experiences, which is the real key to watch. So I'm so happy to talk with you, Christian, and get to know you a little bit more, and happy that we both actually are looking into this thing and realistically,
Yeah,
I think needs to be
absolutely.
done.
And I am excited too, and I read some of your articles in regards to the near-death experience, and you sound like me whenever you keep mentioning that you have to watch the videos. Just watch the videos, and it just speaks for itself. If you just do the research, and I end up talking to a lot of people who will discount near-death experiences, yet they haven't read a book, they haven't watched anything, a video, they've only heard statements, and based on those statements, they form their own conclusion, which I don't think is fair towards the phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, they don't. People don't watch. They usually discount it without watching any near-death experiences or not even reading about it.
Yes.
Is even reading about it, you find the clues. And yeah, you and I were the only ones in that whole discussion that were like that have actually watched it. Everybody else was like, oh, just trying to find the first excuse they could find.
Right.
But I believe that the model we need to switch from is from separateness to connectedness, and in switching our model to connectedness, everything in society will improve, including the problems with capitalism and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, you need to get to near-death experiences. You need to look at them, see what people are saying, and you'll quickly understand that connectedness is the real way things are working when we transition to that upper level, and the way things work here too. And that is the best model to adopt. It's the most truthful model to adopt is connectedness. And I'd say, let's see, learning about near-death experiences and looking them up for yourself can only improve your life. It can't make it worse. You'll only get better. You'll learn more truth. You'll learn more about how things work, and then you'll become more loving person, probably as a byproduct. So there's no downfall to looking into these.
Just going back to that oneness, once we have that understanding of oneness we all have with each other, and we can see past the illusion, a lot of the other things will start to fall away, and we'll have more solutions to some of the problems we're experiencing today. Kind of like what Kevin was talking about in regards to capitalism and a lot of other aspects in our world, such as world hunger. And it's absolutely inconceivable that we should have any country, any place in this world where there are people who are starving, who don't have anything to eat, while another country is completely flooded with food in abundance and doesn't decide to share that with their neighbor, their common men, their fellow common men and women. But yeah, that's what I have to say on that.
That's excellent. I want to say one more thing. I was the type of person that believed in separateness pretty much my entire life. First 38 years of my life, I believed that we're separate and that the brain creates consciousness. Now I know I couldn't have been more wrong, having actually looked into it. I just hadn't looked into it before, and I just believed what we were taught in grade school, which is wrong. The materialist only viewpoint that brain creates consciousness. That part is wrong. And now, but before, the way I lived was as a programmer. I was a very self-improving person. That's how I've been my whole life, ever since 15 years old when I hit rock bottom. I've just been bent on improving myself, and everything I do is to make myself better and get better. And I'm always the best programmer in a group, and always the best. I try to, be the best at everything, and a high performance person is what I've been. And I didn't tie that together with love and connectedness. I did not look for or care about opportunities to love other people. Didn't think about it at all. Just thought if I can become great and admired because of all my performance abilities, I can become great and admired, then that's when I've made it, but I've literally been overlooking those opportunities to while I'm doing this, being that performance person I need to be, to actually love another person and realize that that's the substance of what's important, and that as reported by all NDEs, when you get up there, that's the stuff where we're like, I'm so glad I did that. That's what life is all about, those loving moments. So I encourage you to not flippantly discard it like I did for the first 38 years of just like, who cares? Whenever I feel love, I'll feel love. I encourage you to be different, to just, while you're doing whatever you're doing, and we all have vastly different lives, even intense and extreme lives, whatever you're doing, you're not judged, but find a way to love people, find a way to be loving to others and to receive love from other people in whatever you do. That's my advice.
Agreed. And just to bring things back for more understanding, we just want to clarify with the hellish NDE stuff, so that way we don't scare anybody. And we want to go more into that just to help people understand this. And you can take it away. I know you wanted to say some stuff about it.
Yeah, not only just like not scare people, but people will be really wondering, what is the purpose of the hellish NDE? Mm-hmm. Is it like religion says, where we end up in a hell place to be punished
forever
for things that we did wrong? Yeah, and if you're like me, you're probably going to be thinking, oh shit, I did do some things wrong. Do I qualify to get into heaven, or am I going to hell? And you'll be constantly tortured by that thought of whether you are good enough. And I'm here to reassure you that everybody goes to the heaven place, in summary. But there's some minor caveats to that everybody goes to the heaven place. But as we pointed out earlier, some people, there's two things that can happen. One is you resist the fact that all this is happening. And that's not surprising. Most of us have grown up with the materialist only point of view, and we think that it's blackness after death, and that brain is producing everything, and that it is impossible to have an experience outside of your body and traveling through a tunnel. So if you believe firmly right now that it's impossible, you may have some confusion. So the first thing hellish kind of experience that can happen is the confusion of not understanding what's going on and then resisting it. What it actually presents to you is like actually what's happening. Like it feels normal and it feels right when after you've died, you feel like you're a spirit and you feel the release of the weight of your body and you feel free and you feel more love just automatically, and you just feel so happy actually getting out of your body. Yes. Regardless of whether you believe in NDEs or not, that's the way you feel at first. Yeah. And then some people might get confused after that they're like, why is this happening? And they'll actually start to question it, and their old beliefs will actually come up, and they're strongly attached to them, and they'll resist it, and they'll just get real confused and scared. Why is my body over there and I'm here free? Like, doesn't make sense. And they're like, they kind of shut down, and they as a result of that shutting down, they start to panic and experience some seeming like terror types of things. And it's not that they're being punished. Like, let's be very clear. They're not being punished at all. Nobody's judging them, or they're just confused, and they're having a kind of a panicking reaction to how different this is than what they're used to and what they believe is possible. And so they can get trapped into kind of just being scared while it's happening. And they often will start to go through the tunnel, and they'll be scared while they're traveling through the tunnel. And I do recall a few people describing how scared they were going through that tunnel, they were, that it was mind-blowing to them, and they were resisting it, and they were even resisting all the way while they were traveling and everything. But, to be clear, this stuff it happens to you from the NDE, and it's how you accept it, to whether it's terrifying or whether it's freeing and loving and great. And again, to reiterate, the natural feeling is free from your body and and a loving feeling and a loving aura, and feeling light and feeling just great, feeling free and happy. So that's what it actually feels like. But if you're resisting it from your mindset, you can get scared and terrified during
Right.
it.
And I believe
So,
that that process takes as long as it takes for that individual to understand. So,
oh yeah, yeah, exactly, right. How
yeah,
long it takes them, right?
yeah,
And then I've heard the stories where they finally accepted it, and they said there's been distinct moments in several people's stories where they said, I just finally said, I guess I'm dead. Let's just go with it. And
hmm
then they went with it, and then it was all wonderful after that.
yeah,
So, to be clear, if you're watching our podcasts, take our word for it, prep yourself. Just don't be so confused. Just realize what's happening at least.
yeah.
Go with the flow. Yeah.
Do some investigation, and it doesn't hurt, and to look into it. And unfortunately, this is starting to change, but I've come to realize that people also don't like their illusions destroyed. So whenever they encounter this information, if it goes against their belief system, they won't even look. But also, people do tend to look more into this information when either they're faced with death themselves, maybe they're told by their doctor they only have 6 months to live, or maybe they lose a loved one, and that's usually when they start to do the investigation. So if you happen to be listening to this, again, don't take our word for it. Do some research yourself, and no better place to start than YouTube. It's free, and you can watch a lot of near-death experiences there. And I also have my own channel, and I have an NDE compilation which I shared with Kevin, and my channel is called Transcendence. So you can see some there, but there are thousands of videos all over YouTube. IANS. .org actually has a compilation of written stories from people sharing their near-death experiences as well. If you don't like videos and you would prefer to read them, they're there as well.
Yeah, excellent. And just to sum up the hellish part, there's one more hellish experience that can happen, and it's not just from confusion; it's from people that were, I guess, lived a feeling of separateness most of their lives. I would imagine. I guess maybe serial killers or something. Honestly, I'm not qualified to know what level will constitute this experience, but some of the NDEs, instead of going up into the tunnel and going up, they will go down like they're going to hell. This is a real thing. I mean, do you concur, Kristen? We haven't talked about this yet, but I've heard it.
In regards to, I liken it to that, but I also liken to it a little differently because I also come from the energy vibration aspect, where they scientifically already discovered that love and joy and those feelings and emanation, freedom, is a much higher vibrational frequency, and fear, hate, and everything that stems from fear, hate, anger, cruelty, and all of those things are lower, slower wavelengths of vibration. So yes, you could in a sense say it's going downwards. And it would seem that Earth and the physical realm is a more denser reality. And that plane of existence is a much higher level of reality, where that's why people talk about the love and all of that. So I guess, yeah, you could technically say downwards. I don't know if it's a physical downwards, because I don't know, or if it's just another realm of existence. That might be better for me to say.
Yeah, I have to say that I personally heard at least 3, for sure, stories of people that felt like they were sucked down from their body, like straight downward, and they fell. And it was very distinct and everything.
That could be
It may
a
be
very real
that,
thing.
yeah, I don't know if they, that's, like if it's really falling or not really falling. It's so hard to say because the experience is different out there.
For
It's
everyone.
not, yeah, it's not so much physical space either, and it's hard to. But they do describe it as falling, and there are people that have gone into to complete the story. The theme is that some people, and it's like 3% of all near-death experiences. The last figure I saw, and I've rarely ever see hellish ones, and it's possibly because people don't report them as much.
That too, yeah, that's another thing.
But I definitely have to get a conclusion. The conclusion is that you're not stuck in this place. They
No.
get sucked downward into hell. It's this hellish experience, and I've had lots of vivid descriptions of it from people describing it directly. They say that it is like, foul smells, stenches,
Creatures.
or like creatures that are horrible and have claws and stuff, and they're tugging at you and ripping off your flesh in a metaphorical way, because you don't have flesh, but they're ripping you apart.
Yeah.
But it feels like they're ripping you apart. So it's not, don't demean it by saying there's no flesh or body. And that's what scientists do, and that's what they do wrong, is they reduce the significance of everything by saying, well, I have an explanation for it. I have a name for it. Yeah. Just because you don't have a body in this hellish place, you can't say, don't get on your high horse as a scientist and say, like, oh, there's no bodies, there's no way to experience being torn apart. Like, no. It's even more real when you don't have a body. And again, like, that's what we've been telling.
Many near-death experiencers talk about these heightened senses where they can still smell, they can still taste and feel and see without the physical body there. And it's even it's more heightened than when they were in the physical body. But just to go back to the hellish NDEs again, to continue closing, there was a doctor who had an hellish NDE experience, and he didn't experience the falling per se, but he just was in this realm. He just came to the realm, and what we would call hell. There was fire, creatures. He had to like lay on a bed of like needles, and it was just very dark. And because that reality was so real to him, and he's like, well, if this place is real, he then asked, he was like, God, save me, help me. And that's every time, every situation, every story where I've ever heard of a hellish NDE, and the moment they ask for help, they're always taken from that place. They're never condemned there. It's almost as if, okay, you're using your free will to ask for help. We'll step in now and we'll help you out here. And because that seems to be a theme I keep coming across, that free will plays a part in that. And whatever it is, God, beings, or whatever, won't interfere with your free will. You have to either ask for it or declare it yourself to move from that realm. So not to scare people that it's not this place you'll be stuck in, but yeah.
Exactly. But it's horrifying. Like, let's not downplay it. You said like there's some needles and stuff, and it's just, it's just really terrible. It's super intense, terrible. It's super intense, horrible things. And that's the way they describe it, with a lot of emotion, the horror of it, but they're there. They can, it is kind of they feel like it's like an eternal place. Again, there's no time. In all of NDE experiences, the time kind of goes away, just like I've demonstrated in life. It's an illusion as well. It can fade in and out. Yeah. There's not time, so they do feel like they're in this hellish place and they don't know how to get out. But every time they ask for help, and that's, by the way, a natural reaction for pretty much everybody that's gone into NDEs. I don't know if there's anyone that has not asked for help, but it seems like from the stories that there are people that choose to stay there. But as Christian pointed out, if you ask for help, if you just say, like, please help me, like, which is a natural inclination. Even I'm a non-spiritual, non-religious programmer and technologist my whole life. And even when my going gets rough, I'm like, please help me out of this, just take some purpose,
Yeah.
And that is actually the kind of thing that people do when they're in that hell place. It's like, save me from this. And every time they say, save me, light comes in, the darkness opens up, and light comes in and takes them out of the dark place and brings them to that connected place where there's just nothing but love, which is a seemingly almost opposite world of that other place. Would you say that's accurate, that it's they're kind of opposites?
Yeah, and also to touch up on time, is I often say that time in and of itself doesn't really exist. Clocks exist. We use it for convenience, but it becomes more apparent in that other realm. Yeah, because people say, I could have been there for 10,000 years. I could have been there for a day, and there's no way to tell because it's perceived differently. There's a different understanding that seems to automatically be built in. So you just have that awareness and you can't tell the difference. You can't say, oh, I've been here for 5 minutes, But,
I know we missed one piece of proof because I remembered it for a second. It had something to do with hellish or coming back. It was some veridical type of proof that one more thing that people would like to hear. I just can't remember it right now.
That's okay.
But yeah, we'll think of it probably
It doesn't.
later. But
Things are going to repeat too in podcasts, so it's just so we can always, if you remember it later, write it down or something, and then throw it right back in there.
Yeah. So anyway, just to summarize, to sum up the hell thing is that it seems to be like a temporary kind of cleansing area. You could think of it that way, maybe, that they go there for a while. As soon as they're asked to be saved, they get out of it. So, and that's only 3% of people. Okay. And so it's pretty much all heaven for everybody. And so overwhelmingly, it's really good news. Like 97% of people go to heaven. So you're unlikely to be in that 3% that actually experiences a hell. But if you experience a hell, then you can just get out of it. So the real thing is it's really a positive outlook, and you don't have to worry of if you've. It's not the kind of thing where you worry if you're making the mark.
Yes.
Whether you're going to make it to heaven. You don't. That's not the case.
One of the biggest.
It's like.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It's like Christian was alluding to, that you decide whether you want to live and feel the feeling of separateness forever with all that it entails, which is a hellish place.
Exactly.
You decide whether you want to live there. And I don't know what it takes for somebody to decide to live there.
I don't
know.
I also think it also has a lot to do with forgiveness. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving yourself. Because some people hold on to things and they don't forgive themselves, and they say, I don't deserve to be going to heaven, or I don't deserve to be treated well because of the things I've done. And that thought, that belief anchors itself, and that could hold you somewhere. So it's just, I think that's part of it. And learning to forgive yourself and understand, even if you did something you didn't necessarily were proud of, to learn that you've learned from it. If you've learned from it, then you can move on from it, because you're not going to do that action again. You're going to be, that experience changed you. Now you're a different person now. You don't have to worry about that. Yeah.
It reminds me of what a lot of people say when they come out of NDEs, is that they say, you should not be so hard on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a lesson that I've taken. And this is a great, great lesson. And you should get it too when you start looking into NDEs yourself. That they all tend to say, we're all too hard on ourselves. That it's actually really hard what we're going through in life, and everything is really confusing and complicated and hard. And to me, it seems obvious. It really is hard. On one hand, you have, that we're connected and that we should love each other all the time. On the other hand, you have this capitalist system, especially in America, that's like driven to get money for yourself and greed, and you're constantly tempted by these two forces of like collecting just for yourself and making it for yourself in greed and power. Mm-hmm. And it's such a strong pull. And then the other pull is pulling you towards love and connectedness and getting away from just the greed thing. But you can't just say that the urge for power just goes away because you learn about NDEs.
Yeah. Not
the case. Power and that greed and thing, that it's such a strong force. And in my opinion, it's a constant tug of war in your life. No matter what you do, if you do something towards love, you're giving up what you could have with greed. It's just like the Star Wars, Darth Vader saying, "Come over to the dark side. It's much more powerful over here."
Yeah.
And if you come over to the dark side, you're giving up love and connectedness that you could be feeling. So it's not, you don't win both. You can't have your cake and eat it too in that regard. It seems it's a tug of war between those feelings.
And to add on that, because I know we were having this discussion about, the law of attraction, and what you put out is what you get back, is when people, greed is also, I feel it stems from fear personally. Like if you feel like you don't have enough, or if I give this to my neighbor, then I don't have anything. That is fear consciousness. And whenever you go into that state, you start perpetuating this thing for yourself that you don't have enough. And whenever you're in a state where you're more loving and giving, you're in abundance consciousness. Even when you may not necessarily have all the money to give, but you're giving it, you're paying it forward to give to someone else, and it starts to facilitate itself.
Sorry to interrupt. The story of the $1.
Yeah, exactly.
That's key here. That it only takes $1 from love to make some profound change. It's not about the amount. So just go ahead.
But yeah, exactly. And if we're speaking in terms of law of attraction, abundance consciousness is very different from lack and greed, fear consciousness, where you don't have enough and you have to keep taking, or what about my family? What about me? What about me? It's always the me. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons here on earth, is because we have the illusion of separation. Separation is the illusion, whereas there we have the understanding of oneness with each other. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we come here to learn, to see that play out.
Exactly. But so I want to reiterate one more time that you don't stop struggling with the constant tug of war between evil and greed, or greed. Evil may be just being a lack of good, but greed, and then love on the other side, and the tug of war, connectedness, and then greed, and it's always there, and it's part of the illusion of separateness that we have on Earth, and that may be that the greed and that sort of stuff is what triggers the soul to learn and grow. Suffering is said to it's another thing we haven't mentioned yet, but a lot of NDers, when they come back, they say that suffering is what the real thing that you're really getting out of this is. That it wasn't the moments that you were happy and feeling good that are really counting. It's the times where you're suffering. I've heard that a few times. Don't know exactly how that relates to the objective of feeling love all the time, but you could probably love while you're suffering as well, but suffering is part of the cleansing, or it's the real thing that causes the growth of the soul.
Yes,
and it makes sense. Religion, it glorifies suffering, at least with Jesus on the cross, I think, is the point of that. I'm not very good with religion, but I think he's suffering for us, or that his suffering means something important. And so it is a good mindset to adopt, that when you're suffering, that's when your soul's growing, and this tug of war between capitalism and greed and being connected and feeling loving is like, I don't know, it's part of the growth, it's part of the battle. Learning about NDEs is not going to take that away from you, and that's not the point of learning about NDEs. The point of learning about NDEs is to realize that the real model is connectedness. Once you get up there, once you die, once you transition to that place, that thousands of people will show you that that's where you go. That connectedness is what happens there. But while we're on Earth, it's not all love and connectedness. There's a lot of people that have the different mindset, and they're living in greed. And late stage capitalism in America seems to me like a good example of that. There's a lot of people getting greedy and just trying to take everything for themselves. And there's something about the awakening that's happening right now. Christian and I both feel the same on this. It's an awakening happening in many different areas. I think there's a strong connection between late stage capitalism and the evil of it, that people are feeling all that greed coming out of all the rich people sucking up all our money and us being slaves, and awakening that's happening with learning that it's about love, and those greedy people are not actually adopting the feeling of connectedness and doing the love thing. They're doing the separate thing. And like I said, those people that do the separate thing, they get to the NDE and they have a rude awakening. They experience all the effects that they made on everybody throughout their whole life in their life review. And so there's like awakening happening. It almost seems like sometimes like it's a big funny test, or like a big game that is like a simulation. Like, this is a game. Like, it's funny because people are like, constantly tugged between greed and love.
And to spin a positive note in there, like to, for people who think that it's hopeless, I think that a lot of what's happening, not the suffering of people that's happening around the world, but I think the bad stuff that's coming to light is a good thing, because it's one of the people I listen to, he calls this the rubber band analogy, where what's happening is all of the bad stuff, all the crap and all the stuff that weren't aware of, the suppression and all of that is starting to become really apparent now. And that way we can say, I don't prefer this, because we have to make that choice. And it's starting to happen where people are starting to recognize this, and they're starting to see the unfairness, and they're starting to fight back. They're starting to say, no, this isn't right. I don't want this. This isn't fair. And they're starting to see the deception and the illusion that has been created, and that we were told this is the reality and something else is going on. And as people understand that, as people come to understand near-death experiences, which show the oneness we have with all of each other and with everything and everyone, that we're going to change as a people, as a society, and we're going to have a much better understanding. It's like we're graduating from one class to another. We're graduating from middle school, going into high school, or from high school into college, or whatever you want to call that, just using that as an analogy.
Well, that's a good analogy. And I would carry that analogy further and say, once you graduate from high school or graduate from college, you can still relapse as well.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think that is the main thing. My point I'm trying to say is that learning about NDEs will not free you from the grasp of
you still
power.
have to deal with those things. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, when you were saying it, Christian, like we'll all learn that, we don't want that stuff. I would say on a day-by-day basis, we'll change our minds. And on one day we'll be like, I like power, and if I can get a whole bunch of stuff right now, and I don't care about the people that are suffering, and I can just, first of all, we all do that. I mean, we slaughter animals and don't care about their feelings. When we get rich in society, we're actually hurting lots of poor people, taking away money sometimes, or just not giving them opportunities, and we don't care about their feelings, and we're just saturated in the power, and we love getting so powerful. And that seems like it'll never go away. That it seems like that's a fundamental thing. However, the learning that connectedness is what is up there, what is actually waiting for us when we die, that you'll learn again by researching NDEs, which you can look them up on YouTube. That if you just learn that, you can, your whole model of life gets much better. You'll become love first oriented. Everything you do will be based on love. And those times where you get saturated in power and want power, and I know about that. I go for power also, and it attracts me and it pulls me, and I think that everybody deep inside is pulled by it and wants it also. But I've made a permanent change in my life, and it's a drastic change, and it's made my life better in almost every way. And I've switched from just thinking that we're all separate, that when you die it's blackness, and that what I do to another person doesn't actually affect me at all in any way. I've believed that my whole life, and I've switched from believing that to now believing that what you do to other people does affect you. Like, I know for a fact that when you get into the NDE world, you relive what happened, and you relive and you refeel it and everything. And from a connectedness point of view, right. And that everything in the NDE is a connectedness point of view. I now have a connected point of view. It's a better model for life, even if you get sucked into those power games too, which seem to be part of the growth thing that's going on here. Like I said, to me, sometimes it seems like a twisted, warped game, where people are just constantly tempted to have power, and then, but there's also this, like, love everybody, which is actually like kind of like the opposite of that. So what I'm saying is, you will have a better framework if you research NDEs and look in it. It doesn't mean you have to stop going for power. Like these things that we love, that we all do too. And there's not a lot of people in NDEs being reprimanded, judged, not even reprimanded for killing lots of animals. Although I've for slaughtering animals that we eat, for example. Although I've seen that come up in a few NDEs, like one person had an NDE where they were reliving the suffering of animals that we've done for so long. But in general, most people don't come out of NDEs saying, "Oh my God, we have to immediately stop torturing animals." Although they do tend to believe that, but it's not like they're scarred, like they weren't reprimanded or scolded so much. What I'm trying to say is, you don't get judged in the NDE world, and people that come out of NDEs say we should be easier on ourselves. That this is actually really hard, what we're going through. And that's so important. What I'm trying to say is that power thing is always pulling at you. And the feeling of love, is really the real truth. And there's still a tug of war, even if you know about NDEs. So don't be hard on yourself and realize what's going to happen, but be smart and realize what's going to happen after. Listen to people, what they're saying. What happens out there is real, and adopt a connected mindset, because then you're loved first. People will want to be around you more. Everything that you do, your behavior changes when you're loved first. You feel better, and you find more joy in moments, and it improves almost every area of your life all around, I would say.
Something else that near-death experiencers say, and I've heard a couple times, is that they say if everyone could have a near-death experience, the world would be a much different place. And I also believe that one day soon, because it's already starting to happen, because this information is getting out there, this will be what, for lack of a better term, will be called a scientific fact and understanding. And when it becomes apparent that when we hurt someone else, we're really just hurting ourselves, we won't have the need to do this. We won't have that same struggle of greed and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but at the same time, we're getting into that awareness level. And
and this is a little more theory on what you're saying there. But even if we all awakened right now, and believe me, I've thought about what the world's going to be like when everybody knows about NDEs, because like Christian and I both are trying to get people to realize what's happening. That what the world's going to be like. And I would still say that even before greed and capitalism and all that stuff, I put capitalism right next to greed and everything. But even before all that stuff, animals were still forced to eat each other on Earth. A lot of animals. There are a lot of animals that are, carnivores that only eat meat, and they eat other animals. And that can seem evil. Or it can seem lacking. It can seem like when one animal eats the other, one doesn't get to continue existing. And that, to me, feels like kind of a warped, twisted game. And like, even though we're all loving souls and we can all see each other and we're loving, we're still put in these dog-eat-dog situations. And greedy capitalism and the greedy things humans do is quite possibly a result of that.
Yeah,
that we're in this.
I believe, like, especially with the law of attraction, because it's like what you put out is what you get back. So the world as we see it, animals and everything included in the world we live in, is a direct reflection of how we are right now. And think about it, like with Hitler and during World War II, we were at a different consciousness level then. We had a much different understanding than what we do now. And those were different times. But then you notice throughout history these stages of development that start to happen with awareness levels. And now we're becoming more unity. We have like the different communities that we have out there, where things that weren't socially accepted before are now becoming socially accepted. Kind of like that,
I cannot wait until people realize and start looking at NDEs and realize that we're because that'll fix what's wrong with capitalism, or going for a number, and it's a pure greed game, and we're at the expense of others. But when you realize, when you get to your NDE and you look back in your life, and same with being on your deathbed, you don't have to get to an NDE to look back on your life and be proud or not be proud of yourself for what you've done. And that's once people realize connectedness is what's waiting,
right?
Is you will realize when you look at the, I would call it evidence, when you look at all the stories and everything that points to the fact that connectedness is the real model, then you will want to operate differently. You'll do good things for people even when other people aren't looking, and everybody will start doing that all the time the more they learn this, and that will be great. But I again just want to point out that it doesn't eliminate conflict. That I think that conflict is so it's like ingrained at the bottom level of the dog eat dog world that I'm mentioning, of human life and how it evolves. Before humans, there were animals eating each other for survival, and so there's still a game going on, and it's not just pure love. If it was just pure love, we wouldn't be in this human world. We'd be out there where it is pure love. But we're in this human world where there's actually other things besides pure love. There's like dogs eating dogs.
You got me wanting to explode into so many different directions with stuff that I discovered, but it's unrelated. But yeah,
awesome. We're definitely going to do that.
Yeah, and
what else should we tell these guys? Can we summarize?
Yeah. So the only other thing which it kind of ties into, just to like start closing things off, is the people in near-death experiences also coming to a boundary. Some people reach a boundary where they're told, if they're either told or they have the knowing that if they cross that boundary, they won't be able to come back. So it's at that point they decide whether to continue or not. Some people get a choice. Some people aren't given a choice, and they're told they have to go back, or they haven't finished what they were supposed to do yet. They haven't finished their work. And that happens. But there are many other things that go into the steps. We're just summarizing some of the stuff that comes up. But is there anything else?
And that boundary thing is pretty fascinating, especially if you want to theorize on what's beyond the boundary and everything.
Yeah.
So draw your own conclusions. But we are saying that if you watch NDEs, you will see the theme across all of them, that there is a boundary, and they choose to either come back, or if they go, they know they can't come back if they cross a boundary. So that's real.
Right.
Yeah. And then in general, like I said before, it's profoundly good news for humanity, what NDEs are showing us. And a lot of the people that come back from NDEs are actually feel like their new life purpose is to spread the word about NDEs. The people themselves that go through the NDEs actually feel like one of their new purposes coming back is to inform everybody that this is what happens when you cross over, when you die, so to speak. And so it's a good thing for you to understand this. This is not going to make you into some foo-foo spiritual person and you're going to lose your track of reality and lose your groundedness. I am incredibly grounded, 39-year-old programmer. I program every day. I'm rooted in logic, a very reasonable person. And this has helped me immensely. And I still have retained all of my reasonableness. I can come to great conclusions. It does not change you it changes you for the better in a lot of ways, but it doesn't make you a less reliable person or less reasonable person or anything. It helps you. And so it gives you more reason to look for opportunities to feel love for other people. Like find the opportunities to show somebody that you love them. Mm-hmm. And once you start doing that, you get more friends. Your friends like you more. You get more loving interactions. Your life improves.
Your values change. Yeah.
Your values change, and so it's a double benefit. You're learning the truth. By researching NDEs, you're learning the truth of what happens when people die. And then the second benefit is that the truth happens to be a model that improves your life while you're on Earth drastically in many ways.
Right.
So highly encourage you to just, whenever you're ready, go and start looking into NDEs. Personally, someone like me who's looking for truth and wants to know how things are really working, I would not hesitate to go and check it out. So it's done nothing negative for my life. that I can tell so far. And would you agree
Yeah.
that it doesn't hurt you to know this truth?
No, it doesn't hurt, and it can also help you change your perspective. It's definitely changed my perspective on how I view things, how I view people and situations. Becoming more compassionate, more loving. Small acts of kindness go a long way. And just as an example, I went to go pick up Chick-fil-A the other day. I was going through a drive-through, and I saw these homeless people there with the shopping cart, just like distraught, trying to figure things out and alone. And of course, nobody was really paying attention to them. There was a really big line at Chick-fil-A, and it just kept getting to me that I had the power to do something, at least help a little bit in whatever way that I can. I'm not rich or anything, but I decided to actually buy them a meal. I bought them both a meal that they could have between each other. And they were just extremely grateful. And they looked at me as if it's weird because it's like they're used to not being seen, like because people just ignore them. And they were just so thankful, so grateful that I had stopped and I noticed and I did something. And that's all it takes. I mean, you can do that in any situation, any circumstance, and that can happen anywhere. You could be in a grocery store. It doesn't even have to be a homeless person. It could be someone who just needs help, or someone who dropped something. Doing the right thing, having integrity, and because I believe personally, it starts with us, and we can make a difference. And paying it forward. Imagine that person somehow became a millionaire, and how my small act of kindness, like Penny's small act of kindness, when she gave that person $1, changed them. And he's a millionaire now who can help people, and he decides to because of my impact on his life, even though it was just a moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And not only that, but you're going to review it all in your life review.
Yeah.
And you're going to feel it all, and you're going to see whether you got what you wanted to get out of it, and whether you there was enough love, whether you loved people enough. And pretty much all NDers say that the point was about how much they loved people. And did you find that to be the general conclusion, that in their life review, they were basically observing how much love they gave to other people?
It's their level of love, interaction, and the things we seem to understand or think are important as human beings, like going to college, going to school, getting money, and all that stuff, isn't really as important in that realm. From that perspective, it's only the love, because that love, that energy is all that we take with us, because you're not taking your house with you. You're not taking the money with you. You're only taking your experiences with you, and what kind of experiences you had, that's what you're left with. And you get to review that and feel that. And I think that's why some people will experience something and maybe it wasn't that positive, and they say, let me try again. Let me try again. Let me do it differently this time. And yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good, I guess, maybe wrap up.
Yeah. We can start to wrap things up and go to a close. And is there a place to reach you, or if anyone has questions for you specifically? Or
yeah, definitely. I want to be reached. I'm very open about this subject, and I love to talk about it. And I also highly want to know if you can show me why this is wrong after you look into NDEs. You can't just tell me it's wrong right away. You have to look into it first, and with an open mind. But I definitely want to know if I'm mistaken about any of some of my conclusions and things. I can be reached at Kevin. My name is Kevin, Kevin, at AIMM, which is spelled AIMM, AIMM, like AOL's AIM, but with an extra M.
I'll also put it up on the screen here for people to see too.
Kevin at AIM.online. And so Kevin at AIM.online. Send me an email. I'm also online. You can contact me in multiple ways through my company's Artificially Intelligent Matchmaker, which is my talking dating app, and then Talking App Kit, which adds talking abilities to iPhone apps and other types of apps to make them fully conversational. And you can look me up anytime. I'm Kevin Teman, Kevin Teman, Teman. And so send me a message if you have experience on NDE, you have something to add, because Christian and I are going to be talking a lot more on these things. And I'm also going to be continuing my podcast adventures talking about NDEs because there's a lot more ground to cover. And I want to keep getting people to the trailhead of starting to look into NDEs themselves. And so I want to encourage this awakening that's happening in society. A lot of people are trying to talk about how do we fix capitalism, late stage capitalism. It's so broken. There's so many people that are greedy and just taking the money and it seems like we're just eroding away. This is the fix for late stage capitalism in my mind.
I'm going to
because
say
when people understand, when people learn about NDEs, they come to the stark realization that it's connectedness that is the real model. This is the way everything is working. And in late stage capitalist greed does not compute with that anymore. They let it go. They're like, I think I'm going to do something where I can just find a way to express my love for other people more as much as possible. And they kind of let go of everything else. And so getting people to NDEs and realizing they're real, that's also the fix for a lot of capitalist problems too, my perspective. How about you, Christian? How do people contact you?
You can reach me on Instagram. I'm going to put it up on the screen here at Transcendent Vibe. And you can also reach me and drop a comment if you have any questions on any of my videos on my YouTube channel called Transcendence. I'm going to put that up on the screen as well. And yeah, you can shoot a comment. You can reach me on Instagram. You can direct message me if you have comments there. And check some of my stuff out. I have NDE compilation videos there. I have one specific NDE video that goes over the life review as well, specifically focusing on the near-death experiences with the life review, so you can get an idea of what we were talking about and what people go through when they have that kind of experience. Yeah,
so in addition to this podcast that we're doing right now, I plan to continue on, and Christian and I plan to continue on with more discussion about the implications of near-death experiences. We want to talk, just wander and think about what it actually means, and at the next level, where we can actually speculate with some, where it's not just totally made up. We want to just understand what all these things mean, and I want to continue talking about NDEs pretty much permanently because I need to get people to the beginning of the trail where they can learn about near-death experiences for themselves. So we will continue to make discussions, and we'll see on the frequency of those.
Yeah, so you guys stay tuned. We're also going to have more episodes where we can actually start putting some documentation out there, and we can put links in the description so you can read them for yourselves. Case files, even files released through the Freedom of Information Act by the CIA that looked into the phenomenon of consciousness, its implications, and remote viewing, showing that the brain is more of a reducing valve for consciousness and not the starting point of consciousness. So stay tuned for that.
I've had the reducing valve theory long before I started researching NDEs.
See, that's an interesting thing, huh? Like how you're like, wait a minute, it's a thing.